a prayer entitled A Historian's Prayer, written by Xiao Chua, to be read by Miss Leon Aldea of Emilio Aguinaldo Museum.
Lord of history, we humble ourselves to you in this critical time for our country. Thank you for the gift of knowing our mother country through our history, because it is only in knowing her that we can truly love her. Thank you for the realization that history is not just about the great personages who created and led the nation, but also about the people from the margins whose blood, sweat, toil, and tears built our country, that we may always be sympathetic to the plight of the common man. Grant us a sound mind to discern, with the guidance of your Spirit, what is relevant and true using our God given reason. Give us the diligence in finding our sources, the most exhaustive we can get for any given topic. Protect our sources from destruction and neglect, and preserve our national memory. Provide us with a critical mind in analyzing the sources we may arrive closest to the truth, while recognizing that there can be as many perspectives as it can be. Teach us to be fair to each party, while being faithful to the truth that is in our hearts. Remind us that history, aside from understanding and the complexity and diversity of the present, can also have the power to unite us and the power to make us proud of ourselves so we can build our own identity as a people. Demonstrate to us that our understanding of our own culture enriches our perspective of the past. Help us become a bridge of understanding between the academe and the people, and make us learn the lessons of the past so we could create solutions to our present problems towards attaining a better future. Despite the gifts that you have given us, may we stay humble and see our work as a way of serving our students, our readers, our publics. Yet, may we see ourselves as bearers of true enlightenment and justice, not enablers of darkness and ignorance. May the way we tell the stories of our past be relevant to our people, that they may learn something from it. May we bring history closer to the people, all for your greater glory and for the nation that you have given us. Amen.
Joining us from for today, welcome to the panel C of the session 9 of the Philippine International Quincentennial Conference. I am John Paul Egalina Villera from Project Saysay, and I will be your moderator for today's panel entitled Philippine Itinerary of the Magellan Elcano Expedition. We are currently live on almost 100 Facebook pages, primarily at the National Quincentennial Committee, Department of Foreign Affairs and other foreign service posts, National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, among others. We had the first two panels of Session 9 last December 2, convened by the National Museum of the Philippines, where they presented 5 researches that explored the rich and diverse world of our pre-colonial ancestors, using archaeological practices in uncovering aspects of its technological, maritime, and other traditions. For today's panel, we will examine closely the core of the 2021 quincentennial commemorations in the Philippines, which is the Philippine route of the Magellan Elcano expedition. In previous commemorations of this historic event, the primary focus was on the Armada de Maluco and their triumph over the challenges that faced them. However, this focus put an unequal burden on our ancestors, who were equally responsible for the eventual success of the historic endeavor. This 2021, the NHCP put primacy on the indigenous perspective of this historic event, with 34 different quincentennial events remembered this year. So for this afternoon, the first article that will be read was written by Mr. Robert Cootie. Bob, as he was fondly called, was an independent British researcher based in Balangiga, Eastern Samar. A member of the Royal Historical Society, He was noted for his demystification of the Balangiga incident of 1901 in his book Hang the Dogs, which was published in 2004. Recently, he published Fools of Gold, Volume 1, Fraud, Fallacy, and Fable in Philippine History, with Volume 2 recently written. Sadly, Mr. Kuti passed away last September 21. His article, which is about the creation of Enrique de Malacca as a Cebuano by the historian Carlos Quirino, will be read today by Ms. Ayesha Saiseng Apostol of the NQC Secretariat.
The Historical Sins of Carlos Quirino. Much of the myth and misinformation about Enrique can be laid at the door of eminent historian Carlos Quirino, a formidable figure in the Philippine historical community and national artist for historical literature, honored on a postal stamp, who single-handedly created the myth of Enrique speaking Cebuano and his imaginary origins in the Philippines. The first time I engaged with Quirino's lack of historicity was while researching the Battle of Balangiga of 28 September 1901. A claim that guerrillas were smuggled into the town of Balangiga under cover of a cockfight came from his pen and was consistently repeated in other historical works. In fact, he had mistranslated the Waray word pintakasi, which actually means communal work in Waray, but which many Tagalogs used to mean a cockfight. This error is relevant to his creation of a Cebuano Enrique de Malacca. Despite submitting his research in other areas to the rigorous peer review of appropriate journals, a process in which subject matter experts access a contribution, he did not do so with his claims regarding Enrique. His interpretation of Enrique began in the 1970s and appeared in a book of a lecturer, Pigafetta, First Italian in the Philippines, which he gave in 1980. Published in Italians in the Philippines, 3 lectures held at the University of the Philippines on July 16, 1980 by Carlos Quirino, Esteban A. de Ocampo, and Giuliano Berticcioli, published by the Philippine-Italian Association. In his lecture, Quirino says, after leaving Homonhon on Maundy Thursday, a baroto from the west came alongside the Spanish ships. The slave Enrique spoke to Pigafetta. They immediately understood him. From that time on, conversation between the natives and the Spaniards proceeded quickly with Enrique as interpreter. How could Enrique have known the Cebuano language? The tongue spoken in Malacca is very different from that of any Philippine language. The only explanation is that Enrique originally came from Cebu. He was probably captured as a boy of 10 or 12 and taken as a slave to Malacca. Tomé de Pires, the first Portuguese ambassador to China, wrote in 1513 that Borneans voyaged to Luzones to buy gold and foodstuff, which they traded in Malacca. It is highly probable that Enrique was one of those captured in a raid. At that time, a colony of Luzones existed in Malacca, which had been seized by the Portuguese and was a great center in Southeast Asia. Magellan must have talked to young Enrique, and hearing that he came from a group of islands in the same longitude as the Spice Islands, decided to buy and bring him to Europe, where they tarried for several years before Magellan could make the trip under the auspices of the Spanish king, Carlos I. Linguistic evidence is conclusive that the so-called slave Enrique was a Cebuano. I broached this matter to Admiral Samuel Eliot Morrison during his visit to Manila several years ago, in preparation for his biography of Magellan. But he refused to consider the matter. For then it would not be Ferdinand Magellan who was the first to go around the world, nor Sebastian Elcano the Spaniard. but a humble Filipino named Enrique. It is high time that we Filipinos render Enrique that homage. Thanks to the Italian chronicler Pigafetta, who carried the young Cebuano's name in the first account of the circumnavigation of the world. This is extremely problematic. Quirino ignores the landing at Masawa and Enrique's communication with the Datos there. Quirino's argument requires that Enrique spoke both Butuanon and Cebuano, as well as being fluent in Spanish and Malay, and Chamorro. Quirino sets aside Pigafetta's statement that the Datos understood Enrique because they spoke several languages. He ignores the fact that trade Malay was spoken in every trading port throughout maritime Southeast Asia. He does not explain why the ruler of a well-developed international trading port like Cebu did not speak the common business language of the entire region. Giving Enrique an imaginary backstory based on a false premise does not add anything to our knowledge of Enrique. He gives Enrique an accurate knowledge of longitude, which could not be determined until John Harrison's marine chronometer was invented 2 centuries later. There is no way to calculate longitude accurately without a precise chronometer, which was not available to Magellan or Enrique. Quirino presents no linguistic evidence, assumes some conspiracy-induced motive to Morrison, a Magellan biographer who retraced Magellan's route in 1971. Morrison seems to have been more familiar with primary sources that Quirino ignored. By 1991, Quirino had turned his might have, must have, could have speculations based on incorrect assumptions about language into these indisputable facts. In the Philippine Free Press of December 29 that year, he published an article, "The First Man Around the World Was a Filipino." In this, we are told that Magellan learned that there was a teenage male to be bought at the slave market, one who, after he had conversation with him, said that he had come from an island farther than the east than Sabah on the same longitude as the Moluccas, but considerably north of it. The young slave, subsequently baptized with the name of Enriquez, must have told Magellan how he had been captured by Muslim pirates and that Europeans were unknown in his area of the Pacific Ocean. He must have come from one of the islands then known as the Luzones, about 12 days by sail northeast of Borneo. Here, Quirino is building on the sand with not a pebble of foundation. When faced with many secondary and tertiary sources, he shrugs and says, Magellan obviously wanted to keep secret the real birthplace of Enrique as east of Borneo. By the time Quirino gets along to publishing his Who's Who in the Philippine History in 1995, he has created an entire biography. Enrique was born in Carcar, Cebu in about 1493, died in 1563 in Cebu City, served the Humabon Spanish and Portuguese interpreter after the Battle of Mactan, married and had children. Disingenuously, Quirino writes that Enrique is said to have been kidnapped while fishing off Cebu, without mentioning that the only person who says it is Quirino himself. Since there were neither Spanish nor Portuguese visits to Cebu until 1564, a year after Quirino claims Enrique died, it is difficult to see what practical use Humabon had for him. In Quirino's mind, the supposition he had built on the basis of a faulty understanding of maritime Southeast Asia had become real in his imagination. A process is known as reification. Quirino's misinformation was widely accepted, especially among historians, and still is, because of appeal to authority. Why would a man of his stature say it if it wasn't true? Rizal made the same logical error regarding Ibn Battuta in his estimation of the location of the Wali Sea. Enrique was not from the archipelago now known as the Philippines and did not speak any Philippine language. He was not referred to by any of Black Henry in any language until a mistranslation of Magellan's Will into English in the late 19th century. The immediacy of Magellan's Will, a legal document of probative value with the legal standing of an affidavit, supersedes memories of other recorded years after his death. Enrique was captured, not purchased, and was not from Malacca. There is no record of Enrique after the attack on the survivors at Humabon's banquet, and no evidence that he reached Malacca later. He was not, therefore, the first circumnavigator. Carlos Quirino teaches us that no matter how eminent, authoritative, or respected someone is, the validity of their work depends on sources, the correct use of data and analysis, not the certificates in their wall or their face on a postage stamp.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aiseng Apostol. It would have been wonderful to have Mr. Kuti with us today to discuss his research further. Sadly, though, that is no longer possible. Moving on with our panel, our second speaker this afternoon will discuss how the initial contact on Homonhon Island, which was an uninhabited island back in 1521, between the members of the Magellan Elcano expedition and the residents of Suluan, affected the belief systems and ways of life of these two distinct groups of people. Our second speaker, George Emmanuel R. Borinaga, PhD, is an assistant professor in history at the Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History of the University of San Carlos in Cebu City. He's a lifetime member of the Philippine National Historical Society and is currently Secretary of the Executive Council of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, National Committee on Historical Research. Dr. Borinaga, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sir JP, for the introduction. So allow me to first share my screen. Is this visible?
Yes, sir. We can see your presentation.
Thank you, sir. So good day to everyone. I'm here to present on the paper titled Magellan Lands in the Land of the Dead, or subtitled Homonhon as Sacred Island of Ancient Visayas. So I have a short modification to the subtitle. So rather than Waray, I'd like to focus on the Visayas in general, because a lot of the narratives, the folkloric material I will be presenting covers this wider area that are now divided into different regions. So in terms of the questions, I'd like to answer the following. So what role did the island of Homonhon play during the Magellan Elcano expedition's first circumnavigation of the world from 1519 to 1522? The second, why was Homonhon uninhabited, according to Pigafetta, and subsequently called Isla Encantada during the early Spanish period? And lastly, what was the impact of the Magellan Elcano's expeditions 1521 Homonhon landing on local beliefs and on early responses to Spanish colonization and Christianization? So I want to divide my paper into 4 parts. So first we'll discuss the encounter between the Magellan expedition and the inhabitants of Homonhon, of Suluan, who visited them in Homonhon around March 18 of 1521. So second, I will discuss the label of Isla Encantada given to Homonhon during the early Spanish period. And third, I want to discuss the impact of this landing and the 8-day stay of the expedition on the island on the local belief system. So we will examine narratives not only from the Visayas, but also from Mindanao. And I will conclude my talk with some discussion on the implications of these folkloric materials. So I want to synthesize not only the well-known chronicles like Pigafetta and early Spanish chronicles, but as mentioned, I want to link this with folkloric narratives, oral narratives, and how they correspond to frequent hazard. So the Philippines being one of the most hazard-prone countries on the world, so it has an impact on the narratives we tell ourselves, especially the mythology of the people of the Visayas and the other parts of the Philippines. So Bancroft has this recent article which talks about the shared experiences when a group or different groups of people share a hazardousness of place. So there's bound to be some correlation between the stated folklore I mentioned and the frequent hazard they experience on a day-to-day basis. So there's a field, an emerging field that is called geomythology, which links these narratives with the hazards that a certain locality experiences on a frequent basis. And I want to link this with some of the meanings, so especially in the case of Diwata names and how they might have links with cultural practices of the people. So in terms of Homonhon significance to the Magellan expedition, so this has been widely discussed in the recent or the past years events, quincentennial events, and I will focus on Homonhon and the other localities that the Magellan expedition passed through will be covered by the rest of today's speakers. So as we've learned from Pigafetta's account that the expedition had arrived in the area of Samar around March 16, 1521, but they did not land on solid ground until a day later. So it is said that they had anchored overnight in Suluan, and in fact, there was almost an encounter or a meetup on that day, but the locals on a boat in Suluan had escaped or gone away, so they were not able to meet these people, and they decided to land on the nearby island of Homonhon the next day on March 17. So what's interesting about this encounter is that Homonhon was not just any island. So as we'll see later, it was quite central to the culture and religion of the inhabitants of the area. So Pigafetta mentions that it was uninhabited, but we'll see why that was the case. So these are some of the details of the 8-day stay in the island, and the fact that the Magellan expedition was able to get much needed provisions and a recovery time for their exhausted fleet. So they had incurred casualties in their Trans-Pacific voyage, and they found abundant water in Homonhon as well as food. So thus Homonhon became known as the watering place of good signs, because it was not only a source of much needed water, but also they saw the first signs upon their meeting with the inhabitants of Suluan that there was much gold in this area that they had arrived in. So they also noted how the natives were quite friendly. So there was a chief that greeted Magellan upon landing on the 18th, and as Pigafetta noted, the people were friendly with them and we received them with kindness, their kindness with pleasure, because they seemed good and respectful. So it was a very cordial early encounter between the fleet and the first group of what we now call Filipinos to have met and welcomed the expedition. So as we'll see below, there was some doubt about this encounter in the early years or the early first century of Spanish rule. So Father Alsina, who we will hear from again later, he doubted that this meeting, at least as mentioned in the oral literature, had happened, because as he mentioned, there was a very well-known tradition that the Spanish ships arrived in that island in the beginnings, as he called it. But there are evidence that the Magellan expedition had indeed been there, as seen in these rock inscriptions close to where the quincentennial marker is now situated. So the group I will discuss, as mentioned, includes not only the area, the Waray-speaking areas of the Visayas, but also other parts, especially Panay, where we will see some links between the narratives in the eastern part of the Visayas with those on the opposite end. So some images here, I have some images from the Boxer Codex and Father Alsina. So second, we'll now discuss why was Homonhon uninhabited. So first, because it was considered a Diwata abode, and second, because it seemed to have been regarded as a land of the dead, or a sort of spirit afterworld. So it was Alsina who gave, at least for our recent historians, that gave context. Why was Homonhon uninhabited? So basically, he said that the island was a sort of sacred water, or water with curative, apparently, powers, and thus people went there along with the intention to pay homage to a certain Diwata. So they also got firewood, which according to later accounts was quite useful in their day-to-day activities. And this was even used in deep diving. So it is said that firewood from places like Homonhon would burn for a long time underground. So this would have been very useful in extracting maritime resources in this very biologically diverse part of Asia. So we also learned that Makapatag is the name given to the so-called owner and god of Homonhon. So according to Alsina, and to quote, the island was a celebrated one in their old times. They say that the people from nearby places would repair to it in pilgrimage to offer prayers to the Diwata, who they said had his abode there, and so that he would grant them health, prosperous time, among others. End quote. So they said that Makapatag, who was the son of Malaon, which is another name that we'll see later on, lived on this island and is considered as the greatest of the Diwatas. So according to Alsina, he likened Makapatag to Jupiter, which is the king of the gods, or the god of sky and thunder of the Romans. So here are some pictures of the resources that would have been much needed by the natives in going to the islands. So I say much needed because according to the accounts, you needed to be brave in order to visit this island at that time, or at least at the Spanish contact. Because as noted by Alsina, so again, it was the abode of Makapatag, who was synonymous also. So there was another word, Malaon, which they used to refer to a same deity, or at least the feminine aspect of that deity. So the one whom they called Malaon in the region of Ibabaw, so which is the northern and eastern part of Samar, so the side facing the Pacific, is acknowledged as their supreme being. So they also called Malaon Makapatag, which means he who sets everything in order and makes everything equal, a name by which they gave to understand the equality of divine justice. So this is a very interesting etymology, something that makes everything equal, which makes you ask So what does it refer to? So if we are to look at the physical world, so what is its closest equivalent? So I would argue that this refers to typhoons. So the descriptions provided by Alcina elsewhere is quite striking in how it matches this description of Makapatag as the great leveler, the great equalizer, because not only is it something that corresponds to Alcina's description of typhoons, so as an event where whatever is visible and stands out somewhat perishes, and even the lowly, most lowly being, even a worm, is pulled down and destroyed by these very powerful forces of nature, as we call them today. But at that time, it's arguable that these typhoons were seen as manifestations of the presence of the Diwata. And even in after Yolanda's 2013, so this was a term, the great equalizer, that was applied to Yolanda, which is similar to how Father Kobak, so the translator of Alcina's manuscript in the 20th century, had also put into words his understanding of Alcina's description of Makapatag. So Homonhon, as we are all quite familiar in terms of the patterns of typhoons in the Philippines, it's a an area frequented by typhoons. So including Typhoon Yolanda and two other strong typhoons in 1897 and 1912 that caused devastating storm surges. So we see here a possible link between Makapatag and natural phenomena such as typhoon. So we also see in Father Kobak's clarification of the etymology of Makapatag, how Maka somehow denotes frequency. So someone or something that is fond of. So for what the root word stands for, which is patag, so fond of leveling something. So there's connotations of repetition or frequency, just like the typhoons that frequent this island. So we'll see also how Makapatag can be understood as an enabler. So we'll see the links between this phenomena, typhoons, and the slave raiding that is a well-known practice of the ancient Pintados or the ancient Visayas. So we have correlations in other parts of the world, how typhoons, thunder, storms, they are linked to deities, gods in other cultures. So even Yahweh, the God in the Old Testament, has been labeled as a storm and warrior deity who leads the heavenly army against Israel's enemies. So same with the Greeks, and in Mexico, they also have among the Zapotecs, Kusiho, and among the Japanese you have Okami or Kura Okami, who is a Japanese dragon and Shinto deity of rainbow and snow, although probably not a warrior deity. But in the Visayas, I would argue that Makapatag is another name for Makandok, which is mentioned by another early chronicler, Miguel de Luarca, as one of three main war deities that the Visayans or the Pintados invoke before going to war. So Makapatag might have been a typhoon god, and another side of him was a war god of the Visayas. So this is the argument. And we can see links between these movements of Diwatas at the Spanish contact with the movements of giants in folk literature, so oral narratives that have been recorded in more recent times. So the folklorist couple, Don Hart and Harriet Hart, for instance, in the early post-war period, they noted the predominance or the ubiquity of this myth cycle about Makaandog and his family. So this is actually available online, a very long article and also very diverse in terms of the versions. So this is something which we will see also with regard to the Diwatas, how their names, the phenomena attributed to them, there are also variations across this area. So just some example how Alcina had noted that there was a giant that crossed on foot from Limasawa to Panaon and then to Caraga, and how Makaandog had a brother in Leyte, and this is from the 20th century, that he just took a few steps and he went to his brother in Leyte to borrow the coconut grater or kaguran in Pinaray. So it actually helped to explain in the folk literature why these islands spoke the same language, because they were inhabited by this ancestral giant family. So these giants, the movements attributed to them have similarities in how the movements of the Diwatas at the Spanish contact were also told in their narratives. So say Chirino in 1610 had said that Kapatag, which is a derivative word for Makapatag, or a root word for Makapatag, the son of Malaon, which again is interchangeable with Inilaon herself. So these two deities were somehow interchangeable, but in other versions, they were mother and son, Laon the mother, Kapatag the son. So they are both considered as their greatest. So comes down with others from heaven and resides in an islet, I think near Dulag or Giguan or Giwan in the open sea, which the Spaniards call Isla Encantada. So there are two sources for the Isla Encantada name. So it's Alcina in the 1660s and Chirino from the reports of the early Jesuit missionaries in the Samar Leyte area. And compare this to Pucano's data from 1968 after he'd done fieldwork among the uplanders of Panay. So he says Kaptan was the principal deity of the early Visayans, lived in Kahilwayan, so the upper world. And whenever he wanted to go down to the world, he passed through the Madyaas mountain in Panay. So my rough estimate of where Madyaas is. But we see a correlation between the path of Typhoon Yolanda. So how these descriptions of where these Diwatas passed through, they correspond to the path of some of the strongest typhoons that have passed through the area in recent memory. So 2013, 1912, 1897. And this is the location of the other identifiable sacred spaces for deities like Laon and Linok, who you will see again later on. So Linok is a name for a Diwata which is quite central to the origin narratives of the Visayans. So there are some variations in these origin narratives, but what they have in common are some of the names like Kaptan, Kapatag, Linok, or as written by Fray San Agustin, an Augustinian, Linog, in 1698, who was the god of earthquakes, who had married the first man and woman. So we will learn more about the significance of this man and woman story, Sikalak and Sikabay, because it has bearing on the landing in Homonhon. So I mentioned the giant movement. So we can surmise that this movement of an apparent giant from Limasawa to Panaon to Homonhon is linked to earthquakes, because in the 1950s, in this project called the Historical Data Papers, they also noted this name, Eno, Enok, Inok, which are similar to Linok or Lino. So there are variations again in these labels. But this giant was believed by the old folks in the 1950s as the reason for the shaking of the ground. So, but we see again this link between giants in the 20th century and Diwatas in the Spanish contact. So the question is, was Makapatag a war god? So in an earlier presentation, so in the countdown to 500 lecture series. So I argue that in terms of the names of the Diwatas and their associated abodes like Humonhon, okay, we can see nga there's a match-up. So Makandok is unnamed as to where he was located or where he was based, but there's a similar word, Makaandog, the name of the giant I mentioned earlier, which is associated also with Humonhon, especially ang Makandog version, which is the name given to that giant in Suluan today. And na makapatag deity of Humonhon in Alcina and Chirinos accounts. So we see that they are both linked to Humonhon. And more than that, Makandok, the war god mentioned by Luarca, is basically a synonym of Makandog. So these two words, I argue, are this. So they mean basically to terrify. So someone that is so terrifying that people tremble in fear. So we can see this in the early Visayan dictionary by Sanchez, where we see this word linked to a frightening enemy, but we also see how they were beginning to link this to evangelization. Pero it was linked to war, to raids, so to very fearsome people. And in today's Samar dialect, so Andok, Makandok, and Makandog, Andog, they again have something to do with trembling in fear. So in Tagalog, kilabot, which is the word they used to describe the Waray-Waray gang in the 1990s and early 2000s. And perhaps also to the raiders on China, which are believed to have come from the Visayas. Yeah, they just heard the word Pishoyi, okay, they would run away and tremble and run away in fear. So Makandog, as mentioned earlier, Makapatag, Makandog, okay, they are indicators of an enabler. So someone that causes fear or causes things to be flattened or to be equalized. So another interesting information is how Humonhon is linked to or near some of the most feared and respected clans or kaanak in the early Spanish or at the Spanish contact. So we have this description by Father Alcina again, how the Pintados, or this is Luarcas, the Pintados are a courageous and warlike race. So they have continually waged war on both land and sea. So this is a general description, but Alcina provides more specific locations. So both Samar, the west coast of Samar Island, and Ibabaw, so the northern and eastern coast, were considered as brave and feared in their antiquity. So the Ibabaw kuno in particular were regarded as the most feared by the Visayans in ancient times. So apparently within the Visayas were themselves feared. So ancient Boholanos were, according to Alcina, the bravest and most courageous in these Visayan islands. So there's also a passage in Mateo Sanchez's and other Jesuits' early dictionary. So a word hinsug, which is today himsug, which means healthy or fitness connotation, but at that time had links to bravery, courage, and fearsomeness. So all the relatives are brave. So he emphasized or pinpointed Baclayon, Dawis, Siquijor, Panaon, and these areas as brave or fearsome mga clans. So we notice how these areas, Samar, Ibabaw, Bohol, and the nearby islands, okay, they are somehow close to Humonhon. So what would have been the significance of this island to these feared clans or raiding clans? So there are other links. Datu Sumanga, the epic of Bohol, about raids conducted to win over Bugbong Humasanon. It also mentioned a raid in China. So this highlights how these raids were quite wide-ranging, and Alcina also provides the specific or favorite nga sites to raid by the people of Ibabaw. So Albay, as far as Casiguran in Luzon and islands of Catanduanes, and also in Manila. So Alcina mentions how they even captured principales or mga datus, and a lot of these families in his time, 1668, were still living in places like Biri, Bobon in northern Samar, and as far south as Borongan in eastern Samar. So other links between these groups. So Pigafetta mentions how the ruler of Masawa was a brother of Siawi, who was the ruler of Butuan Calaghan. And in the Spanish contact, so before Legazpi's arrival, kay Waray Tupong was the leader, but they were dispersed because of a Ternatan Portuguese raid. So another link between islands are those of Bangkao and the elites of Bohol. And we will see how this was linked in the Tamblot and Bangkao uprisings, which began at the same time. So it's apparently because the leaders who led these revolts were relatives. So perhaps kinship ties that went back to pre-colonial times. So other groups identified include the Arayas, the Iligines. So these were groups that were associated again with raiding. But what is the role of Homonhon for these raiding groups? So we will see in looking at the data regarding burial sites. So in 1859, 1860, Fedor Yagor had visited these areas, and he noted how an island now called Andog, but Andog at the time apparently, so again Makaandog, a probable connection, and the island of Homonhon had been burial places for the warriors of these people in pre-colonial times. And there were also links to slave sacrifice in these burial rituals. So their heroes, meaning the Daragangan warriors of old, were usually buried in these cliffs or caverns. So usually caves that are found in islets. And the most prominent perhaps is that of Homonhon. But in contemporary folklore, we will also see that Homonhon is linked to these spirits that are also connected with epidemic disease or slave raiding, and their souls being held captive in Homonhon. So very perhaps difficult to disentangle what is the historicity of these narratives, but we can perhaps present some possibilities. So one of which being epidemic disease was believed to have been caused in the early Spanish period by hungered diwatas who were resisting the encroachment of the Jesuit missionaries. So I have here 4 pins and I'll show what the link with Homonhon is among these narratives. So in Poro Island in Yacamotes, okay, they have this belief about a cave, a popular tourist spot in that island, where one entrance or one part passage leads to the Jesuits who were believed to be protectors from disease. So this is again from the historical data papers. And we can link this to the historical fact of how the Jesuits became renowned for their healing of smallpox in the 1590s, so mga around 1596 and 1597. And that was probably why a lot of the Visayans had converted, because they saw baptism as a way of healing from this very deadly disease at that time. So the other passage, according to this account presented by Ma'am Linda Alburo in an earlier webinar, is that evil people from Homonhon were spreading cholera and smallpox so that their souls could be brought to Homonhon as slaves. So again, very strange nga folktale, pero what is the significance of this in relation to the landing of the expedition. So, or in the role of Homonhon in pre-colonial times. So another account, this time from Kabalian, which is similar, that the souls were brought to Homonhon to become slaves, and those who died of cholera, they were not actually dead, so they were just replaced with these a stalk of banana, perhaps, and the banana tree. But what's interesting about this story from Kabalian in southern Leyte is that the spirit from Homonhon is called Apoy, which is basically an ancestor or Apo in the Luzon languages. So in Cagayan de Oro, Father Demetrio, in a compilation of folklore, had also found this folk tale about Homonhon as the island where Encantos had brought their victims of cholera and chickenpox. So we see how disease was associated with spirits coming from Homonhon who wanted to take away souls and make them slaves in that island. So again, there's links to priests of how they were able to overpower these Encantos, and they were the only hope in fighting against these evil spirits. So among the Mamanwas, kay the Homonhon is a word for a class of notoriously evil messengers of Satan, so that induce a shaman to kill. So they don't put responsibility on the shaman for the killing, because he had only been made to do so by this evil spirit called Homonhon. So we can liken this or compare this to other cultures in the Philippines where they had war spirits like Hipags among the Ifugao, or the Busao among the Baganis of the Mandayas and Bagobos. So they were war spirits that were invoked to give them courage and valor. So this is now another possibility of why Homonhon was significant. And among the Manobos, there's also a link between the Gatnen spirit beings and spirits from Homonhon and Canlaon volcano. So again, these two, ang Makapatag and Malaon, they were interchangeable names, but they were ritually approached, these Dagatnen spirits, when there was an epidemic. So they invoked them for healing. And another link to Homonhon in among the Agusan Manobos was this word, Dinailan, Dumahilan, Dinadilan, which according to Dr. Buen Consejo, who came upon these terms, were synonymous to Magellan. So there's a link in among the Agusan Manobo between Magellan and an encounter between foreign and native. So here I have the etymology of Laon. So it meant something old and old harvest. So she was a goddess invoked for harvest. So she was also linked to volcanic eruptions. So the context are slave sacrifice. So how these burial areas like Homonhon had required slaves to be killed in order for their chiefs to be accompanied by minders in the afterlife. But another possibility is that Homonhon had also been a pilgrimage site for raiders. So these fleets might have passed through this island and performed rituals in order to receive ferocity or isog. Because as we saw from those war spirits in other cultures, nearby cultures, the Visayans had also believed that by invoking their ancestors, most of which might have been buried in Homonhon and nearby islets or sacred islets, they might receive courage or isog before they conducted these wide-ranging raids. So two words of which included Pagdaga and Pagdasi. So thus, why was Homonhon enchanted? So one, it was a Diwata abode, so people were afraid to go there because they believed that the Diwata who inhabited the island, which is Makapatag, was easily angered by the presence of people. So this should be linked to how the Magellan expedition had spent 8 days in the island without apparent event. So it was an uneventful event or stay. So there might have been something in the folk mind in the early years of Spanish rule, how there was a significance to the landing. And next, it was an enchanted village. So there's an account how these Spaniards had seen a village, seen houses, and seen people, but upon arriving at the island, they didn't see anything. So it's a bit like the Biringan story or these stories of enchanted cities that are still quite popular in many parts of the Eastern Visayas and perhaps in nearby regions. But why would Homonhon come to be regarded as the source of these evil spirits? So one could be Christianization, that the demonization of the indigenous spirit world by the missionaries had led to this negative image of spirits coming from Homonhon. Or as mentioned, it could have been linked to pre-colonial slave raiders. So these communities might have been victims. But it also tells us that Homonhon was somehow a spirit world destination. And we can link this to what the Jesuits have said, how their warriors, upon death by stabbing or other violent death, they immediately went up to heaven to join these warrior diwatas. And it was not only these men of courage, men of valor, but it was also the binokot, the princesses, the beautiful women who also joined these warriors with the diwata of the skies. So what's the significance of this image of Homonhon as an enchanted island for the arrival of the expedition? So one is that the Europeans seem to have been regarded as long lost kin of the Visayans. And two, there was a narrative in the first few decades of Jesuit evangelization that Homonhon-based diwata, so gods like Inilaon and Makapatag, had caused these disease, typhoons, and earthquakes because they were angered by the Jesuit teachings. So there are two seemingly contradictory narratives that are going on. So one of which is that the origin narratives of the Visayans, so especially this area of Panay, which the group of which was called the Tingyanes, the mountaineers in Luarca's account. So he said that those who fled out through the door are the Spaniards, and they had no news of us until they beheld us return through the sea. So there's a narrative about the Spaniards being long lost kinsmen of these Visayans in the uplands of Panay, which is linkable to Alcina's account that these ships of Magellan had been seen as somehow a significant event, that they had landed in Homonhon in the beginning of the Spanish occupation or Spanish contact. So we can link this to these origin narratives, how Kaptan had been regarded as a very significant deity in the birth or the emergence of the first man and woman. So he had been the one to plant the bamboo reed that had been the container for Sikalak and Sikabay. And in the dispersal narrative of the Tingyanes and many parts of the Visayas, okay, we see how the chiefs were. So this is based on a widespread story that the social classes had been originally part of the same family, but the children had been dispersed by an angry father, primordial father, apparently because these children were lazy. So he planned to get rid of these children, and the chiefs who hid in the inner rooms of the house became, the children who hid in the inner rooms of the house became the chiefs. So those who hid in the outer rooms became the Timawa, and those who hid within the wall, the ding-ding-ding, became the slaves. So those who hid in the kitchen, especially the fireplace, became the negritos. And the Spaniards, so this is the end of that account. So they were the ones who went out the door, and they had no news of these people until they saw them return to the sea. So it's possible that that return had been the landing in Homonhon, and that became part of the narrative among these Visayan islands, especially how Kapatag, Kaptan, diba, there was a correlation how Homonhon had been linked to this deity that had a role to play in the origin story of the human race. So there's even a version from Hucano, which is updated na. It's no longer just the Spaniards, but it also included the Americans. So one of the three primordial ancestors of the Ati, the Spaniard or the Europeans, and the Sulud. So which is, since this is from the Sulud Society book of Hucano. So Sit went far, far away and was not heard from until his children returned. So it's very similar to how Luarca had recorded that the Spaniards were these long lost kin who they saw return through the sea. So again, the landing in Homonhon is possibly the beginning of that. So what are the possibilities? So kanina, there might have been a link between Luarca's account and Alcina's discovered oral tradition. So even though he didn't believe in the landing in Homonhon, but the people insisted that that indeed happened. These ships went to Homonhon in the past. And it's possible that in the early years, this became part of that origin narratives. And these were our long lost relatives who had returned first to Homonhon, and then they began to settle in other parts of the Visayas, especially with the Jesuit evangelization. So there's therefore a possible link between these oral traditions in terms of the Diwata names and their origin stories. So if Bob had talked about Quirino mythologizing Enrique as the first Balikbayan, so this is the late 16th, early 17th century version. So the Spaniards as the Balikbayans, as Kidlat Tahimik had recently titled his long in production film, Balikbayan #1. So there was subsequent hospitality in these areas. So in fact, Abuyo, which is Leyte, Tandaya, which is Samar, and Masawa became the islands first known as Las Filipinas. And they were called as such because the Villalobos expedition was recognizing the support they gave to the early expedition. So the question is, might that have something to do with the earlier visit of the Magellan expedition on Homonhon? But as mentioned, a counter-narrative, so there was a belief that the early catastrophes and epidemics, so even before COVID, ng smallpox epidemic, but at the time it was believed to have been caused by Makapatag. And upon the influence of Inilaon, so again, Kapatag is either another name for Inilaon or as a son of Laon. And other events included the typhoon of 1601 and the earthquake of 1608. So we see how this seemed to have led to a rupture between the relationship of the Visayans with their ancient deities, so especially their greatest deities. So this description appears to suggest that there was an ongoing relationship or exchange. So they offered tuba to their god, but they were no longer being responded to. So he no longer loved them, and so kills them by sending disease. So this was their explanation in the 1580s. And as mentioned, in the Quirino account and in the Alcina account, a similar phenomenon. So disease as caused by the angered Diwata because they were against the teachings of the Jesuits. And nag-scam ko na ang teaching sa Jesuit, and it was a means for the Spanish king to extend his kingdom. So there was this vengeance aspect that was at play, very important to Visayan cultures, that if you incurred an injury, you must punish the oppressed, the one at fault. And in this case, it was the Visayans who were being punished by their Diwata for accepting Jesuit teachings and colonization. So this return narrative would be repeated in the subsequent periods. So there's always this attempt to return to their old traditions, and these narratives continue to survive in the accounts of the Suluanons. So the first people who met and welcomed the Magellan expedition. So they believed that their survival from Yolanda was brought about by the strength and the isog imparted to them by their ancestor Macandog. And there's a mention of the resistance of Macandog against the colonizers, but there's no more mention of them of these invaders as their kin. So in conclusion, the Magellan Elcano expeditions landing in Homonhon Island allowed for much needed rest and recovery after a treacherous trans-Pacific voyage. So Homonhon was uninhabited since it was locally regarded as a sacred island and pilgrimage site that served as the abode of their greatest Diwata or Diwatas, and as an apparent burial site or spirit abode for departed warriors and ancestors. So folkloric evidence from the first 150 years of Spanish rule suggests that the expedition's transit and landing in Homonhon was widely remembered in Visayan folk memory, despite doubt and disbelief from early chroniclers such as Alcina. So the expedition's uneventful landing in the sacred island of Homonhon and the Suluan Islanders' warm welcome appear to be linked to the two narratives I mentioned, the Spaniards as returning relatives and as the catastrophes, disease, epidemics of the early Spanish period as caused by angered Homonhon-based Diwatas. So these contradictory or changing narratives of return and retribution would shape subsequent responses to colonial rule. So this included conversion with the help of the Jesuits, resistance and attempts to return to their old way of life. But we also see that this led to a synthesis of these two belief systems in order to accommodate Christianity and Western culture, as well as older customs and values, such as isog, which is very important to the Visayans in order to survive in a very hazard-prone environment. So this ends my presentation. Damo nga salamat ng mo pa nga adlaw hayo nga tanan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Borinaga. That was quite a fascinating lecture. It's really interesting to learn about the belief systems of our early ancestors in the Visayas, especially in the way they viewed Homonhon Island, significance they gave to the island, which changed over time. And also quite fascinating was the idea of how they viewed the Europeans as returning relatives. And in the same manner, their attitude towards these returning relatives also changed over time in the idea of trying to reclaim their culture and at the same time moving on towards an idea of accommodation. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Borinaga, for that wonderful lecture. Again, you would like to remind everyone that questions for our speakers can be typed in the chat box or in the Q&A section of Zoom or in the comment section of Facebook. Your questions will be answered by our speakers at the last part of this event. So from Homonhon, we move to another island, and that is Palawan, as our next speaker will talk about interactions that occurred during the initial contact of the natives of Palawan with the members of the Magellan Elcano expedition back in 1521. Our third speaker, Professor Michael Angelo A. Doblado, is currently the director of the Palawan Studies Center of the Palawan State University. He is an active member of the board of directors of the Natural Historical Foundation of Palawan which manages the Palawan Museum. He has presented papers in national and international historical conferences organized by the Philippine Historical Association. And his research interests include local town histories, ethno-histories, and social histories of Palawan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My paper for today, this afternoon, is entitled 1521 Palawan, Contacts and Encounters in Pigafetta's Promised Land. So the purpose of this paper is to first identify the approximate anchorage and landing areas of the Magellan Elcano voyage in the province of Palawan, and then show the different courses of action taken by the Spaniards in each of these anchorage and landing areas. And in doing that, we would attempt to present the contacts and encounters that happened between the Spanish crew and the early people of Palawan. And this is actually an attempt to show glimpses of the characteristics and traits of these early Palawan people based on the manners and ways they have interacted with the Spanish crew. The methodology employed in this study is called triangulation in historical site identification. The historical narratives were based on the notes of Antonio Pigafetta and the other two crew members. Also essential were the old maps of Palawan, existing ethnographies of indigenous people of Palawan, and other related studies. So, the first anchorage happened in the municipality of Aborlan. This is followed by the first landing, which happened in Brooks Point. Second landing is in Balabac, and the third landing is in Batarasa. All of these municipalities or towns are located at the southern part of the mainland province of Palawan. So in the Aborlan historical marker, this was actually placed in near the shore of Barangay Marikit in San Juan in Aborlan. It represents the Magellan Elcano voyage or expedition in Palawan for the entire province of Palawan. So you can see here in the bas-relief or the sculpture, the interaction happening between the Spaniards and the local people of Palawan. So Aborlan was the area of the first attempt to land. The crew were able to row near the shore but were driven away by spear-throwing people. Aborlan today is dominated or populated mostly by the Tagbanwa. So the old Aborlan area was the ancestral domain of the Tagbanwa. So it actually spans the entire midsection or middle area of the island. That is from east to west coast. So there's a theory. My theory here is that it was the ancestors of the Tagbanwa who were the ones who drove away the Spaniards. So they were only able to cast anchor, attempted a first landing here, but they were driven away. The first landing happened in Brooks Point. So this is the marker for Brooks Point. And it is in Pigafetta's chronicle. He drew the map of Palawan and indicated there Porte de Tegusao, or the Port of Tagusao. So the marker here was installed in Barangay Barong-Barong in Sitio Tagusao, beside the river Tagusao. So Brooks Point, Rizal, Española, Quezon were all part of the ancestral domain of the Palawan. So this is the area of the first landing. This is also the place where the crew who were already starving were able to eat. Not only that, they were able to trade and restock provisions needed for their ships. And what is interesting here is there's actually two landings that took place in Brooks Point. So the first landing is probably with the first encounter, the first landing, the first encounter were probably with the Palawan. It was also mentioned there that Joam Campos was the sailor who volunteered to come ashore. And he said, it's okay for me to be captured or killed because I'm not a navigator. So if anything happens to me, it would not be a loss to the entire crew or to the entire ship. So surprisingly, they were welcome, or Joam Campos, the one who volunteered to come ashore, was welcome, was fed and entertained, and he was able to trade. No? And word of the foreigners trading with the local people spread all over the place. And what happened here is another group coming from a nearby area invited the Spanish crew to transfer to their area and also trade with them. So they were invited to sail to another area to trade. The most interesting part here is when they were trading, an emissary of the governor of Palawan, a Portuguese-speaking native who is also Christianized, went to talk with the Spanish crew and asked for their passport and their flag. Now here we have the picture of the third landing. This is actually Balabac waters. So Balabac was the landmark or the reference point that the Spaniards used when they sailed to Borneo, and also upon the return trip to Palawan. It was mentioned in the documents and sources as Bibalon and Biloba in other sources. And this is also the place where the ships ran aground. And they had to repair the ship because it already had holes and it was leaking. Now, the third landing happened in Batarasa, in the Cape of Palawan. The title or the name of the marker here is Dulo ng Palawan or Cape of Palawan. So this is the area where they rested and repaired their ships after coming off from the waters of Balabac. Buliluyan, yung pinakadulong barangay sa Batarasa, meant resting place. It's already indicated in the old maps of Palawan. Buliluyan means a place where the ships rest or stop in order to restock wood or water or to trade before going on to other points. So at this place, Pigafetta and the other crew members explored the area and collected supplies. It was specifically mentioned by Pigafetta as the end or Cape the Island. Another interesting event here was Tuan Mahmud, who also claimed he was the governor of Palawan, was taken hostage together with his son and brother upon the return from Borneo. So I'm about to show a table which will illustrate the place or the anchorage and landing area, the Spanish-initiated courses of action, the reaction of the local people, and the characteristics and trade displayed by the people of Palawan. So, first we have a borderland. The course of action taken by the Spaniards were exploring, discovery. So here they attempted to land. But the Tagbanwa, or the ancestors of the Tagbanwa, drove the Spaniards away from the shore. The characteristic or trait displayed by the Tagbanwa, or the ancestors of the Tagbanwa, were bravery and courage. It is my theory that the Tagbanwas experienced what we call mistaken identity. They have mistaken the Spanish landing crew with that of a Moro reigning party. So their action to drive away the Spaniards can be considered an act of defense of their homeland, their community, and their family. The Spaniards, on the other hand, were desperate and wary. So they experienced treachery in the Visayas. No? So they were already wary. They were already cautious, and they did not force the issue. So they returned to their ships. With regards to Brooks Point, the courses of action taken, there were several courses of action taken by the Spaniards. So the first was baiting, a form of sacrifice. So they sacrificed one of their crew members, whose name is John Campos, in order to test if they would be welcome in the community. So, as it happened, John Campos was welcomed and invited to the center of the hamlet. Here, the soldier was fed and entertained, and he also initiated trade. So at this point, we can say that the characteristics displayed by the people were being kind, humane, hospitable, trusting, and honest. They were also industrious because upon hearing of the need for food, what was available back then was rice or palay, unhusked rice. The native or the inhabitants pounded rice all night because that was the food that was needed. No? That was the only food that they can trade with the Spaniards. The Spaniards displayed what we call desperation. They were desperate, and they were desperate because they were starving. Another course of action taken by the Spaniards were negotiating and diplomacy. So they traded and then sailed to a nearby area and observed official protocols. So they were boarded by an emissary of the local chief. The name of the emissary or representative was Bastian, a Portuguese-speaking Christianized native. The traits that were displayed here was being cosmopolitan. Kasi alam na nila yung ways of the world, so they have knowledge of protocols. Bastian asked for the passport and the flag of the Spanish crew. And he said that he represents the governor of Palawan. So this indicates that there was already a political structure. And it hints of connection with the Sultanate of Borneo. So Carvalho made a blood compact with the local chieftain. And at this phase, the first documentation of cockfighting or sabong happened. So part of the trade center, it shows that Palawan is part of the trade center that is going on between Malaysia, Borneo, Island of Palawan, Sulu, and Mindanao. Palawan is very important for traders because they are sources, or they were sources of products, and they were also sources of slaves. So there were instances where local population or local people were raided, their local communities were raided in order to collect people to be sold to the trade, the slave trade economy happening at that time. And the next course of action taken by the Spaniards were commandeering or tinatawag natin piracy o pamimirata. By July, they set sail for Borneo. they invited actually Bastiang to guide them when they sailed to Borneo, but Bastiang was a no-show. So upon casting off, upon sailing, so they left the port of Tagusao, and they were going to the general direction of Borneo. They came across a boat having three passengers, or three crew members, and they hijacked this boat and ordered the three passengers to guide them to Borneo. Okay, there was nothing eventful that happened in Balabac. The Spanish ships ran aground along Balabac waters. So after repairing their ships, they went to Bulilui and Batarasa to anchor there. So they stayed there for at least 1 month in order to restock. And then they left the Cape of Palawan, o yung dulo ng Palawan, which is Bululuyan. They will go back to Mindanao. So when they were leaving the Cape of Palawan, or Bululuyan Batarasa, they chanced upon a boat. And then they held the boat, or the passengers of the boat, hostage. So on board was Tuan Mahmud, who also declared himself the governor of Palawan. Together with Tuan was his son and his brother. They were held hostage for ransom. So Tuan Mahmud acted in a civil manner and stated he was the governor of Palawan. He displayed pride and being honest. He gave the Spaniards all that they asked for: 400 measures of rice, 20 pigs, 20 goats, 450 chickens, and much more. Dinagdagan niya pa yung hinihingi ng mga Kastila. So, yung hostage taking evolved into an interaction of goodwill and friendship. Because Tuan Mahmud received all their demands and were given additional supplies. So Tuan Mahmud, his son, and his brother parted with the Spaniards as friends. Okay, so to summarize, the courses of action taken by the Spaniards in Palawan involved several methods. You have exploration and discovery, baiting or sacrificing a crew member, negotiating and diplomacy, and several acts of commandeering, or what we call piracy. Even though these were the courses of action taken by the Spaniards in their contacts and encounters with the local people of Palawan 500 years ago, the people of Palawan displayed positive characteristics. They displayed bravery and courage when they drove away the Spaniards, mistaking them for a moral raiding party. They displayed humanity, humaneness, pagiging makatao. They displayed their trusting nature. They even disclosed that they were under the Sultan of Borneo, but they were wary of the Sultan and the Moros, because the Moros were prohibiting them from eating pork, or taking or raising pork or pigs in their areas. They told that to Joam Campos, the soldier who sacrificed himself, who volunteered to come ashore. They were also very industrious. So when Joam Campos said that we needed food, we needed rice, they pounded rice all day in order to satisfy the demands or the needs of the two ships. They also displayed a level of cosmopolitanism, or pagiging medyo o moderno at that time, no? Because they know yung tinatawag nating official protocols. Even the governor of Palawan had an emissary, and this emissary knows how to speak Portuguese. So meaning, Palawan is not really at the fringe. Hindi siya nasa dulo ng nangyayari sa Southeast Asia at that time. Palawan is part, or maybe part of the center. What was mentioned here was the trade between Malaysia, Borneo, Brunei, Palawan, you have Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, and Mindanao area. So very strategic ang Palawan because it's the source of raw materials, also the source of people to be sold in the slave trade. What else? Nobility and being proud. Tuan Mahmud was actually insulted when these were the articles that were demanded as price for his ransom. Hindi lang niya binayaran or prinuduce yung hinihingi ng mga Kastila, dinagdagan niya pa kasi nga nainsulto siya na yun lang ang hiningi ng mga Kastila samantalang siya ay isang mataas na opisyal o siya ay pinuno o governor ng Palawan. And then syempre being friendly. In their interactions, it is repeatedly shown that aside from the Aborlan incident, the early Filipino people or the early Palawenyo inhabitants 500 years ago were very hospitable and friendly. So in context, 2 to 3 years ago, this was not actually a common historical knowledge in Palawan. So the discovery that Palawan is part of the circumnavigation, and we have here 4 historical markers already installed in Aborlan, in Brooks Point, in Batarasa, in Balabac, changes the prehistoric narrative of Palawan. And it also showed to the country the positive traits of our early ancestors. And we can be proud of that, especially the Palaweños. So this is our contribution to Philippine history in the context of the first circumnavigation of the world. Thank you very much, and mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Professor Doblado. In your lecture, you showed us the various interactions of Pigafetta and the other members of the Magellan-Elcano expedition with the inhabitants of Palawan during that time, though not entirely without conflict, showcase the bravery, honesty, generosity, and kindness of our ancestors. We now understand better why Pigafetta, in his writings, named Palawan as a land of promise. So far in this afternoon, we have already heard about the creation of the identity of Enrique de Malacca as a Cebuano and the impact of the initial contacts between our ancestors and the European explorers. Now, we will listen to how the NQC Secretariat was able to study the full itinerary of the Magellan-Elcano expedition, leading to the marking of 34 historical sites. The group of speakers from the NQC Secretariat include Ms. Juvaline Nierves, a graduate of Bachelor of Arts in History at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She is a history researcher of the Historic Sites and Structures Documentation Center of the Historic Preservation Division of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and is a member of the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat. The second member of the team is Mr. Joseph Alec Heradila, a graduate of Bachelor of Arts in Social Sciences with a major in History from the University of the Philippines, Baguio. He is a history researcher with the Local Historical Committees Network of the Historic Sites and Education Division of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and is also a member of the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat. And last but not the least, the third member of this group is architect Janisa Villegas, UAP, an alumna of the Technological University of the Philippines, Manila, with a bachelor's degree in architecture. She currently works as an architect too under the Heritage Preservation Division of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and is also part of the infrastructure team of the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat.
A pleasant afternoon to everyone. Aside from commemorating the Philippine part in the first successful circumnavigation of the world, the 500th anniversary of the victory of Mactan and other related events, or collectively known as 2021 Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines, or 2021 QCP. We are also celebrating this 2021, the year of our pre-colonial ancestors, which highlights our rich ancestral culture, civilization, belief systems, and values before the arrival of the Europeans. This presentation centralizes on the following points. First, the discussion on the initiatives of the NHCP through NQC to further promote the activities and essence of the 2021 QCP. Second, historical methods and the technical procedures that the NQC Secretariat undertaken in identifying the historical sites along the Philippine route of the Magellan-Elcano expedition. We believe that these initiatives would bear fruit, especially in the future generation of Filipinos. We are hoping that nationalism and our ancient core values, as manifested by our forefathers, be inculcated, enriched, and transmitted in every Filipinos. We envision a Filipino society conscious of their history and culture. May these produce ideas, applicable resolutions, and developments for the betterment of this nation. NHCP sits as one of the member agency of the National Quincentennial Committee. Among its mandate is to commemorate significant historical events and declare historically significant sites, structures, and events and personages, and conduct research, produce materials in various media, and publish and disseminate historical works. Hence, the NHCP promulgated its mandates as one of the leading agencies of the National Quincentennial Committee for the 2021 QCP. Since 2018, the NQC has conducted almost 400 programs. Before 2020, most of our programs and projects involved physical attendance and mass participation. However, the implementation of the projects for 2020 to 2022 was hampered with the immediate spread of COVID-19 around the globe. Amidst COVID-19 pandemic, the NQC found alternative ways to further promote the milestones and projects for the 2021 QCP. First is through production of educational materials and conduct of online lectures. So usage of social media and other online platforms were fully maximized to involve wider range of audience and encourage a more inclusive environment. Online lectures, webinars, and other educational materials were made accessible to the public for free. The 2021 QCP official website was further redeveloped as a culmination of our major projects for the quincentennial milestones. Since 2020, we conducted 21 online lectures under the Countdown to 500 online lecture series, which were live streamed in Facebook pages of NQC, NHCP, Department of Education, Department of Foreign Affairs, National Commission for Culture and the Arts, Radio Television Malacanang, and the Presidential Communications Operations Office. So, as you can see on the screen, here are some of the lectures we conducted. The War God of Homonhon and the Arrival of Magellan, Antonio Figafetta in Philippine History and Art, Reading and Appreciating Spanish Archival Documents, and so on. The Office of the House of Representatives Deputy Speaker Congresswoman Lauren Legarda also collaborated with the NHCP and NQC, leading to the successful implementation of the 8 episodes of the Road to 500. All of these can be accessed through the NQC online lecture portal. NQC, Quincentennial Lecture Series resumed through a lecture delivered by Dr. Ambet Ocampo in D1 Eastern Summer. Educational materials were also uploaded online for public's usage. So these include the 500 Years Philippine Spotify playlist, the NHCP produced map of the Philippine part in the first circumnavigation of the world, and other documentaries. So a separate web page for an interactive map of the Philippine part in the first circumnavigation of the world can be viewed and navigated through the NQC official website. As you can see on the screen, each site contains description about the events that took place in each historical site. Conceptualization and preparations to produce two documentaries about the Philippine part on the first circumnavigation of the world and the 500 years of Christianity actually started last year. In October of this year, the NQC launched the documentaries Magnifying the World of Our Ancestors as witnessed and experienced by the Magellan Elcano Expedition and the propagation of Christianity in 1521. One may view the full-length documentaries at the NQC website. Yeah. To further strengthen the relevance and significance of the quincentennial celebrations, we also involve various age groups in our campaigns. So with Victory and Humanity in Me as the theme, 87 children aging 7 to 12 years old participated in Batang Bagani. Not only their artistic inclination and imagination were tickled, there's gradual inculcation of the basic essence of patriotism and pakikipagkapwa in their young minds. Interestingly, entries submitted also depicted the correlation of the theme with our battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. These children acknowledge the dedication and express gratitude towards our frontliners for saving lives. Visual representations of our ancestors and pre-colonial vessels were featured in the online production of the Quincentennial Paper Doll series. This allowed any audience to access and download the crafts through the NQC official website. Then we have a depiction of our ancient boat, such as Karakoa. One way to visually immortalize the life of and worldview of our ancestors is through the involvement of artistic community. Thus, the NQC organized the Quincentennial Art Competition, highlighting 4 themes that encapsulate the quincentennial milestones of the 2021 QCP, namely magnanimity, unity, legacy, and sovereignty. The Lapu-Lapu National Monument Design Competition was also conducted in search for the best design that will be the centerpiece for the proposed Lapu-Lapu National Shrine and Museum. So on February 26, 2021, the following winners for the said competitions were announced online. Featuring the encounter of the Magellan Elcano expedition and our ancestors 500 years ago, the Philippine Quincentennial Museum has opened to the public on April 26, 2021 at Museo Sugbo in Cebu City. This is in line with the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan. It houses two galleries. One centralizes on historical events occurred during the Philippine part of the first circumnavigation, while the second gallery delves on the pre-colonial world view, social political system, economic structure, and flora and fauna. Aside from restrictions brought by the pandemic, so not everyone has the capacity to travel and visit the museum. So what we did, a website integrating a museum virtual tour was developed to have others glimpse of the museum. So we also provided free access to the materials uploaded in the website, intended for educational purposes. The virtual tour of the Philippine Quincentennial Museum. So we encourage everyone to visit the National Quincentennial official website, where you can see or view many educational materials, specifically for the commemoration of the quincentennial events in the Philippines, the celebration of the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan, and other related events. So one of the major projects of the NQC is marking the 31st sites of the Philippine route of the Magellan Elcano expedition. So the determination and identification of these sites will be further discussed by Joseph Alec Eradilla and architect Janisa Villegas. So turnover ceremony and unveiling of quincentennial memorial markers started in Giwan Eastern Samar on March 16, 2021. So on April 27, the Filipino people witnessed the simultaneous conduct of activities and programs in commemoration of the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan. Nationwide, simultaneous flag raising ceremony and wreath-laying rites to various monuments of our heroes and great men and women in different localities were held. So in the Liberty Shrine, the commemorative program was graced by the Office of the President, Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea. So our military men paid honorary parade to Lapu-Lapu. Historical markers for Mactan, Lapu-Lapu, and Ferdinand Magellan were unveiled during the event. So various historic sites and landmarks across the country were also lighted in blue. So that's Museo Emilio Aguinaldo in Cavite, Presidential Car Museum in Quezon City, and a part of Museo Jose Rizal in Dapitan. So in Miss Universe 2018, Catriona Gray hosted the Quincentennial Evening Show in Liberty Shrine. Those are glimpses of the events during that night on April 27. So aside from that, actually the NHCP and the NQC also took the opportunity to update the historical marker of Lapu-Lapu. So what you can see on the screen is the 1951 Lapu-Lapu marker. And the next one is the updated version of the Lapu-Lapu marker. So bearing more comprehensive content about Lapu-Lapu and the historic victory of our ancestors in Mactan against the Magellan Elcano expedition. So the successful implementation of the 2021 QCP would not be possible without the utmost support and active participation of various institutions, organizations, local and national government units, most especially the member agencies of the NQC, namely the Office of the Executive Secretary of the Republic, Secretary of the President of the Philippines, NHCP, Department of the Interior and Local Government, Department of National Defense, Department of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Education, Presidential Communications, Operations Office, National Commission for Culture and the Arts, Office of the Presidential Advisor for the Visayas or OPAV, Department of Public Works and Highways, Department of Tourism, and the Department of Budget Management. We are very grateful for integrating the 2021 Quincentennial commemorations in the Philippines in the plans and programs of various institutions and organizations. So as we can see in social media and other online platforms, activities such as webinars, exhibit, cultural shows, artwork competitions were conducted to further uplift and celebrate the life of our ancestors and the deeds of our heroes. Again, we are truly honored by the efforts initiated by various institutions and local and national government agencies. So still part of the promotions of the 2021 QCP, the NQC produced marketing collaterals and souvenirs such as the quincentennial themed calendars, the first one highlighted some of 12 of the 34 historical sites along the Philippine route of the Magellan Elcano expedition. Another quincentennial theme calendar featuring artworks about the quincentennial celebrations in the Philippines, the 500th anniversary of Christianity in the Philippines. We also produced face masks, Lapu-Lapu monuments, quincentennial memorial markers, jacket, tote bags, and NQC flaglets, polo shirts, and t-shirts, lanyards, brochure, and umbrellas. To end this part of our presentation, or the presentation of the National Quincentennial committee secretariat members. This is the vision of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, a Filipino society with citizens informed of their history, who love their country and are proud of their cultural heritage. So while aiming to foster a Filipino-centric point of our history through reclaiming the world of our ancestors, may these initiatives, programs, and projects of the NQC and NHCP conceptualized and implemented bring long-lasting effect to this generation. Let us always remember that our ancestors have had flourishing civilization, unique worldview, and belief systems prior to the arrival of the Europeans. May the values, kindness, bravery, and sacrifices of our forefathers not be wasted and serve as our guiding light for the better future of our nation, especially now that we are facing this pandemic. Let the complexities and greatness of our pre-colonial ancestors be inculcated in the hearts of every Filipino. Thank you very much.
As previously discussed by Ms. Jubilin Yerves, the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat endeavored to locate and mark 34 sites of the Philippine itinerary of the Magellan Elcano expedition as part of the 2021 quincentennial commemorations in the Philippines. The primary task of locating these 34 sites fell onto the laps of the researchers that are part of the Secretariat, namely led by Ian Alfonso, and with Jubilin Yerves and myself as fellow researchers. The research output for this was actually quite lengthy, especially in terms of the standard research output for NHCP researchers. It came out to around 34 to 35 pages in total, excluding the proposed marker texts. This was because it contained a lot of textual analysis as well as supporting documents to refer to the claims and to the particular sites as we discovered. So the research methodology that we used to locate these 34 sites was primarily through the use of textual analysis of available manuscripts and translated materials. We were fortunate enough to have high resolution scanned copies of the Pigafetta manuscripts, both the one in Italian and the one in French, currently with the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, as well as the one in the Lilly Library. Apart from that, we had a lot of help from local researchers, primarily from Professor Mike Doblado of the Palawan State University, who conducted a lot of on-site research as part of their researches in Palawan, and as well as the work of Dr. Rolando Borinaga of the UP Palo, who is a preeminent historian of Eastern Visayas. It was through their local research, especially the knowledge that they had that we did not have being based in Manila, that pushed the research into this level of accuracy or verisimilitude. And then we also used a lot of toponomical analysis using the various place names that Pigafetta recorded, and compared them to the existing sites along the imagined route in order to get the most similar or the best fit for these place names, as well as the general cartographic analysis, where we utilized some of the distance measurements, although this particular method was utilized as a last ditch or a final method in order to support some of the sites that we discovered. This is because there is a great difficulty in ensuring the accuracy of the measurements made by 16th century navigators due to the lack of an accurate chronometer that is used to measure the proper longitude. It was only in the 17th century when the British finally developed an accurate at-sea chronometer, when we could actually accurately plot where we are in the world. So this was made using the best technology of the 16th century and juxtaposed upon the present data or present day maps to locate or to approximate where they were and what were the places that Pigafetta was referring to. We used a lot of written materials, like a lot of written materials for this particular research. Primarily, the primary resources for the Pigafetta manuscripts, we mostly used James Alexander Robertson's 3-volume work. That's separate from the translation that he made with Emma Blair, as well as the translation made by what's that? Skelton. But we also used other primary sources. As you can see here, we have this one by the Angera. And then we also had one, we also used a report made by a Portuguese sailor who captured the other half of the survivors of the Battle of Mactan when they tried to cross again through the Pacific from Tidor, as well as other sources, including maps that were available in the near in our more contemporary period. But it was very challenging for us to actually do the research, seeing as though the whole route covered quite an extensive distance, quite an extensive scope, almost 2/3 of the Philippines. And because when we were doing this, or when we were primarily undertaking the work, we were geographically distant from most, if not all, of the sites. Being based in Manila and as NHCP researchers, we had to utilize modern technology for us to get a grasp of the realities of the location. Something that you can't really get by looking at two-dimensional maps. And we are fortunate enough to have tools at our disposal that helped us immensely in creating this spatial awareness that helped us reimagine the route as it would have took place. It was very time consuming for us. We started the research around mid 2019. With all of the resources that we had and with all of the time that we had, it took us until mid 2020, or almost a whole year, or actually more than a year, to finalize the 34 sites. Even with the wealth of materials already produced on this particular topic. And there was also a cultural limitation on our part, because from the three of us, while Ms. Nieves and I could claim some Bisaya lineage, we have to be honest that all three of us came from Luzon, specifically around the Manila, Southern Tagalog area. And there were certain realities of the particular places that were marked that that were very difficult for us to understand or to imagine. So this is the actual output of the research. This was shown by Ms. Nieves earlier. And we had the first 3 sites. So the first one is marking the island of Samar, represented by Giwan. Then the island of Suluan, the island of Homonhon. Then Gibusong, which was actually marked by Pigafetta, Hinunangan, and then rounding Panaon Island all the way to Limasawa. Now, Limasawa is a particularly contentious site. As you may know, there are claims that this was not the Masawa that Pigafetta was referring to, but the NHCP has already decided through the use of more in-depth research that this is the actual Masawa of 1521. And then we round around the western side of Leyte, up the islands in between the Canigao Channel, and to the Camotes Islands that form part of the present-day province of Cebu. These three islands were actually one of the best recorded in terms of Pigafetta's manuscript. And then we had the long stay in Mactan, followed by the rapid escape after the defeat, where they needed the expedition burned the Concepcion along the shore of Bohol, rounding around the island of Panilongon, which we determined through research to be the island of Negros. And then across the Zamboanga Peninsula, stopping by Kipit or Chipit, and then to Mapun, or what they previously referred to as Cagayan de Sulu. Then going up north to Palawan. So this particular part, the Palawan part of the research, was influenced heavily by the work of the Palawan Study Center, specifically by Professor Michael Doblado, who is also one of our fellow speakers today, and who talked extensively about their research here. So it's best to leave that part to him. And then after Palawan, they crossed back across the Sulu Sea to Sulu, and then through the channel between Zamboanga City and the island of Basilan called Taghima, then across the western shore of southern Mindanao, and then to the southern part, just crossing the mouth of the Sarangani Bay onto Sarangani Island. It was this particular part that necessitated a lot of secondary, second sources, primary sources, but were of different origin. So this is where we used a lot of Portuguese and eyewitness accounts, because this particular part of the journey was not well documented. So of those 34 sites, we managed to get most of them marked, or commitments to mark, with only a few declining the honor of being marked as one of the sites. So to talk about that more extensively, I'll turn over the discussion to architect Janisa Villegas. Okay.
Good day to everyone who attended this conference. My name is Architect Janisa Villegas. I am part of the infrastructure team of the NQC Secretariat. And today I will be tackling about the conceptualization to the unveiling and turnover of the quincentennial historical markers pertaining to the marking of the Philippine part of the first circumnavigation of the world. So essentially, I will be talking about how the marking of these sites were realized. So the outline of this discussion, first we'll talk about the conceptualization and the fabrication of the markers. Then the coordination with the different local government units and national government agencies, the shipment and installation of these markers, and the unveiling and turnover ceremonies. So first is the conceptualization and fabrication of the quincentennial historical markers. So let's discuss the rationale of the project. So in anticipation of the touristic, scientific, diplomatic, cultural, and historical interest to the Philippine route of the first circumnavigation of the world, the National Quincentennial Committee, or the NQC, wants to take the opportunity in highlighting the Filipino voice in the narrative. So this is in response to the misconception about the quote-unquote discovery of the Philippines, highlighting the foreigners and having a bad picture about the Filipino ancestors. So we did this by developing a portion of the sites along the route, installing a sculptural relief in each site depicting the episode of the expedition in it, and installing a historical marker issued by the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or the NHCP. So this is to have a physical or tangible reminder of the history that happened within each site, identified to also educate the locals and tourists. So the initial proposal is this flash on the screen. So for this discussion, let us just refer to this whole historical marker, as the marker. Okay. So the marker is composed of the pedestal, containing the globe signifying the first circumnavigation, the historical marker, which states a concise and factual narrative of what transpired in the place in relation to the first circumnavigation, and the sculptural relief, or the bas-relief, depicting what the historical marker states. So the pedestal was designed with classical ornamentations by architect Dan Paul Awarayan, also part of the infrastructure team of the NQC Secretariat. So initially, the proposed material was to use bonded marble for the globe and moldings, while the pedestal will be of masonry construction in granite finish, or the combination of granite and cement. However, as the project was prepared on the onset of the pandemic in 2020, a lot of adjustments were made, including the change in the materials and the method of construction. The bas-reliefs were made as initially planned, which was casted individually, but the NHCP allowed the contractor to fabricate all the pedestals in Manila instead of constructing it in each site in respect to the health, safety, and traveling concerns brought by the pandemic. So from masonry, the material was changed into reinforced fiber resin. So the pedestal, including the bas-relief, and historical marker, which is made of cast iron, were fabricated and assembled into one whole piece that is just needed to be transferred and installed to the different sites. So the design of the pedestal was further developed. One is that our team presented different rendering variations of the marker, and the color scheme was finalized through consultation with the NHCP architects. Another development also is the NQC's consultation with the Philippine Space Agency to identify the actual tilt of the Earth that was applied to the globe atop of each of the marker. So this is the final approved design. This base is to be constructed on the site. So this is where the marker is to be installed. The local government units, or the LGUs, were the ones responsible for the installation of the markers. And this is a sample rendering of the final approved marker installed on the sites. So the NQC Secretariat was hands-on in the development of the mock-up of the marker prior to the mass production. The proportions of the elements and other details were also adjusted and developed throughout the series of inspections and consultations with the artist consultant or the contractor. The bas-reliefs were based on the sketches of visual artist Derek Makutay, depicting the events stated from the historical marker text of each site. There has also been a series of consultations between the artist and the NQC history researchers to arrive to a credible depiction based on the historical accounts. the researchers were very particular on the details that is needed to be shown, and they were also particular to correct the misconception that the Filipino ancestors are savage and uncivilized people. So the depiction in the Boxer Codex of our ancestors was very much highlighted in the bas-reliefs. This was during an inspection when our then history researcher, Mr. Ian Alfonso, was inspecting every clay maquette to really scrutinize the details on how the sculptor Jonas Roses translated it from the sketch. He is also the contractor for the markers. So these are the phases in the fabrication of the bas-relief, from the sketch to the clay maquette, and once approved, it will be casted into the final bas-relief. So this bas-relief is the Sarangani episode, the last marker in the list. So the NHCP chairman and NTC executive director Rene Escalante was also hands-on in this project and joined the team in this inspection. This is a mock-up pedestal showing the dowel bars below. These dowel bars, these are the reinforcements of the pedestal which will be planted on the base that is in the sides. So this is the finished pedestal. The dowels were folded underneath so that it will be fit the crates. And this is the first batch of the pedestals to be shipped. This was in December 2020. Now we move on to the coordination. The NQC identified 34 sites along the Philippine route of the first circumnavigation of the world, located in 8 cities and 20 municipalities across the Palawan, Visayas, and Mindanao group of islands that was already discussed a while ago by Mr. Alec Viradilla. So the NQC requested for assistance of the national government agencies and local institutions to coordinate with their respective LGUs in organizing also the unveiling events. Somehow, a positive effect of the pandemic to this project was the use of online meetings to easily gather people from different places, as we all do now at this moment. So we conducted the first inter-LGU coordination meeting regarding the project via Zoom on August 27, 2020, attended by the LGUs and local government agencies, representatives of for the sites. This was followed by a second meeting on September 14, 2020. In these meetings, we inform, clarify, and update the stakeholders with the progress of the project pertaining to the fabrication of the markers, the things they need to prepare, etc. The NQC also conducted meetings and coordinations per LGU or per area, per region. This was during a meeting with the LGUs in Camotes Island in Cebu regarding the preparation for the turnover and unveiling events. So it was easy to contact people during this time. So the NQC required the following from their respective LGU government units to comply. So they should provide at least 30 square meters lot with 5 meters buffer zone. The NQC provided the list of the locations where to install the markers. Unless the NQC has identified a specific location for the marker, like a specific capital compound or a national shrine, the lot shall be situated near the sea to contextualize the sites as part of the circumnavigation route. Then letter accepting the project, signed memorandum of agreement, local council ordinance or resolution supporting the project, and site development plan. So the LGU's counterpart, aside from installing the marker, is to develop the site. So such as providing pavement, landscaping, and lighting, etc. And to incentivize the cooperation of the LGUs to develop their sites, the NTUC turned this into a competition amongst those who will be able to comply, since we understood that there will be LGUs who wouldn't be able to fully develop their sites due to the budget constraints this pandemic. The judging period actually just ended, and the top 3 best site development which will receive cash prizes will be announced during the closing ceremony of this international conference on Friday, December 17. For the shipment and installation of the markers, majority of the fabricated markers were shipped by the contractor to the various sites. But the NTUC also requested for the assistance of the Department of Defense or DND to ship the markers to places which have difficult access, especially in the concerns during the pandemic. One of which is in Isabela City, Basilan. The marker was delivered in April 2021 with the assistance of the Department of Defense through the Philippine Navy. So for the installation, we relied on the LGU's updates due to the restrictions given the pandemic situation. So the LGUs updated us through phone calls, Zoom meetings, and pictures. So these are some of the sites during the ongoing installation and site development. We closely coordinated also with the LGUs for any concerns that arises during the preparation and installation of the markers. So for the site development, the LGUs had different ways to present their markers. So some had simple landscaping which blended with the surroundings, like here in Canigao marker in Canigao Island, Matalom, Leyte. And also for the Ticobon marker in San Francisco, in Camotes Island, Cebu. While some tried to be creative, like in the site of the Panilongan marker in Dumaguete City, in which the LGU constructed concrete ship beside the lot to signify the galleons in the expedition. While there are some who conceptualized the site development based on their local culture, like in the site of the Tagima marker in Isabela City, Basilan, that was inspired by the Yakan Seputangan, a headcloth worn by the Yakan ethno-linguistic community, natives in Basilan. While some chose to present their site simply by highlighting more of the natural environment, like the site in Balabac, Palawan, that overlooks the Sulu Sea. Now for the unveiling and turnover ceremonies, the NTUC initially targeted to conduct the unveiling and turnover ceremonies of the quincentennial historical markers on a certain dates. The expedition landed or passed by the sites in 1521 that spanned from March 16 to October 28, 1521. So in the map that was shown here, you can see that there are the specific dates that our history researchers ascertained when the expedition actually landed or passed by the areas. However, most of the target unveiling dates were not met due to various reasons, including the traveling restrictions and lockdowns due to the surge in COVID-19 cases since March to September 2021, and conflicts within the LGUs pertaining to the identification of lots. So many LGUs had a hard time finding a lot due to unavailability of public lot in specific areas. Some had conflicts within private owners to secure a lot donation. Some just had a hard time to focus on the project due to the COVID-19 outbreaks within their localities. To date, there are still 5 markers yet to be unveiled, 2 markers which will be unveiled by the end of this December, and while the remaining others will be unveiled early 2022. The unveiling of the Quincentennial historical markers started at the municipality of Diwan in Eastern Samar, which with the first 3 markers, Samar, Suluan, and Homonhon. These sites were attended by the NQC officials, members, and NHCP officials. While the Samar Quincentennial historical marker that was unveiled on March 18, 2021 was actually attended by the President of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, as the guest of honor. But at that time, there was a surge in the COVID-19 cases in Manila. So the NHCP and the NQC Secretariat decided to conduct the following unveiling events locally, meaning there were no representative from the national government to grace the events. So the NQC had appointed and reached out to different agencies as the NQC representative. Like for the Visayas, we tapped onto the Office of the Presidential Assistant for the Visayas with Undersecretary Anthony Gerard Gonzalez being the NQC representative to the provinces of Southern Leyte, and Cebu, and also the Secretary of the OPAG, Secretary Michael Lloyd Dino, as the official representative for the Cebu marker. The Mactan marker in Lapu-Lapu City were attended by the NHCP and NQC officials and members as it was conducted simultaneous to the D-Day celebration of the quincentennial anniversary of the Battle of Mactan. So the Bohol, Panilongan, Pitik markers were also attended by NHCP officials. With other sites in Mindanao, the Department of Tourism Undersecretary Maya Paz Balderosa Abubakar was the NQC representative. For the Palawan sites, it was Palawan Studies Center Director Michael Angelo Doblado, which was also part of the panel this afternoon. And for the final sites, Department of Tourism Undersecretary Roberto P. Alabado III was the NQC representative.
Very much, Ms. Nerves, Mr. Heredila, and Architect Villegas. The efforts exerted by the NQC in bringing these activities of the quincentennial commemorations closer to the people, especially during this time of the pandemic, is nothing short of admirable. Marking those 34 sites as part of the itinerary of the Magellan Elcano expedition expands our knowledge of the events that happened during that time. We will always be grateful to the NQC for all of these activities. At this point, we would like to remind the audience to post their questions for all of the speakers that we have today in the chat box of our Zoom, also in the Q&A section if you want to put them there. You can also type in your questions in the comment section of the Facebook page that you are watching. So now that we're down to our last speaker, this one is extremely special because just a few days ago, the whole world witnessed the crowning of a new Miss Universe. And I hope I get to pronounce her name right. She is Miss India's Harnaz Sandhu. But today, we will hear how the designers of the national costume of Miss Universe 2018, our very own Catriona Gray, were able to integrate pre-colonial influences. And the speaker who will talk about this is Jerwil I. Cruz, who is a graduate of Bachelor of Arts in History from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. He's currently working as the Historic Sites and Development Officer 2 of the Historic Sites and Education Division of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. He's also a member of the Local Historical Committees Network Secretariat and of the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat. He's also a faculty member at the Department of History of the Polytechnic University of the Philippines.
Good afternoon, everyone. Since the Miss Universe season has just passed with Miss Universe India as the new title holder and our very own Miss Universe Philippines, Beatriz Luigi Gomez, having a top 5 finish with her very iconic Bakunawa national costume, which is serpent-like dragon in Philippine mythology. It is believed to be the cause of eclipses, earthquakes, rains, and winds. So today, I will be presenting the importance of the national costume of another Miss Universe queen, which is the last Filipina title holder of the said crown. Catriona Gray, to the promotion of the Philippine pre-Hispanic culture and its importance on the values of the 2021 quincentennial commemorations in the Philippines. So, this presentation is actually its journey, how the National Quincentennial Committee and the National Historical Commission of the Philippines acquired the entire ensemble of the costume and how it was used by the government to inform the Filipino about our rich pre-colonial heritage. So this presentation is based on my presentation at the University of the Assumption in San Fernando City, Pampanga last November 20, 2019. In line with the first National Conference on Lantern Studies. So, first of all, disclaimer muna tayo, I am not a musicologist nor an expert on fashion. I will just discussing the journey of the national costume after it was loaned to the NHCP by the owners of the costume. So we Filipinos are considered as one of the best pageant fans in the world, or perhaps the universe. So it started off with the 4 successive runners-up placement of Venus Ra in 2010, Shamsi Supsup in 2011, Janine Tugonon in 2012, and Ariela Arida in 2013. And the top 10 placements of Mary Jean Lastimosa in 2014, Maxine Medina in 2016, and Rachel Peters in 2017. Then came the Miss Universe wins of Pia Wurtzbach and Catriona Gray in 2015 and 2018. So the Philippines has one of the longest unbroken streaks in terms of placements in Miss Universe pageant. So until 2021, We are still placing as semi-finalists with Gazini Ganados in 2019, Rabia Mateo in the 69th edition, and lastly, in the recently concluded 70th edition, having a top 5 finish with Beatriz Luigi Gomez. So each year, we are very excited to see the entire wardrobe to be presented by the Miss Philippines candidates. That is why Filipinos are considered not just as the best pageant fans, but also we are also considered as the worst critic of a beauty queen. So aside from the swimsuit and evening gown portions of the pageant, one of the most anticipated segments of every Miss Universe competition is the national costume presentation. So through the years, the country's representatives have often kept the national costume very traditional, picking either a Maria Clara or a Filipiniana terno. So from 2000 to 2014, many of the costumes were designed by by a Colombian fashion designer, Alfredo Baraza. But after Mary Jean Lastimosa's national costume in 2014 received a lot of criticisms online, so the Binibining Pilipinas Charities Incorporated, who is the former holder of the Miss Universe brand in the Philippines, opened its door again to Filipino designers, starting with Pia Wurtzbach, whose Manila Carnival Queen inspired Capisterno by Albert Andrada. So following Pia, Philippine delegates Maxine Medina and Rachel Peters' national costumes took inspiration from different elements in Filipino culture. So there's the Vinta and South Sea Pearl inspired costume by Red Ayala, yung suot ni Maxine Medina, and the Sarimano inspired national costume by Val Taguba. But during the 2018 Miss Universe pageant in Bangkok, Thailand, Catriona Gray and her team gave us a standout national costume called Luz Biminda. So it is inspired by the diverse culture and history of the three major islands, so Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So as any pageant fan knows, one of the best part of the competition is actually the national costume show. So it is a segment designed to showcase the clothing that honors and celebrates the contestants' home countries. So every year, outfits seems to get more complicated, opulent, lavish, or simply some are just engineered to go viral online para mapag-usapan. So kahit alam natin na hindi ito ganun ka-comfortable suotin, talagang irarampa ito ng mga candidate. So yung iba pa nga is nagkakaroon pa ng mga malfunctions on stage, lalo na pag live yung show. So in Miss Universe pageant, actually the scores of the national costume does not affect the total results in determining the finalists, the semi-finalists, or the winner. But a beautiful and well-inspired national costume, or better, national costume helps a candidate a lot in her journey. So when a candidate wore a beautiful national costume, or better yet won the national costume segment, the candidate will definitely catch so much attention from the media, or she will have an exposure which helps her to be noticed by media, netizens, or even by the judges. So here are some of the notable costumes in Miss Universe pageant, in the recent Miss Universe pageants. So first, ito yung Myanmar puppet inspired national costume ni Miss Universe Myanmar in 2016. And this one is ito yung napakalaking national costume ni Miss Universe Bahamas noong 2020. And ito naman yung national costume ni Miss Universe Malaysia And then yung elephant-inspired national costume of Miss Universe Laos noong 2019. And the white elephant-inspired national costume of Miss Thailand. So noong 2018 to, sila yung host country nun. And then this is a very unique national costume, the Transformer-inspired national costume of Miss USA in 2017. And lastly, yung very iconic na tuk-tuk-inspired costume of Miss Universe Thailand in 2015. So the making of the national costume. So Catriona and her team have been very secretive about her Miss Universe wardrobe. In fact, it was only the day before the national costume competition itself, Catriona revealed the overall ensemble of her costume. So alam naman natin na very taga-inilihim ng team ni Catriona yung design ng costume para sorpresahin ng mga Pilipino. And I think yung iba sa social media is nalaman lamang to through a stolen shot of Catriona sa backstage. So her national costume took months of conceptualization, preparation, and execution. So in various interviews days prior to her departure, she dropped hints on the theme of her costume. So this created a guessing game for the fans and followers of Catriona. So the one-of-a-kind costume, which is a departure from the usual Filipiniana terno, is a collaborative effort between Catriona and her team. So Gerson de Mavivas designed the Boxer Codex in styled bodysuit together with relatively accessories such as the brass belt called Hilet Lemimet. So Jojo Bragais, together with the assistance of Ardel Presentacion, designed the knee-high boots featuring Mindanaoan textile patterns. And then the Pampangan lantern, reflecting the colors of the Philippine national flag, was designed as well by Dema Vivas and executed by Pampangan lantern maker Eric Kiwa and Rian Andrade, incorporating the LED technology. So the floret border inspired by details of Philippine Baroque churches made of pukpok, so ito yung nasa edge ng parol, was executed by folk artist Tomas Ramirez of Betis, Guagua, Pampanga. And lastly, yung nasa likod, the bottom Francisco-style mural of selected vignettes from Philippine history is a collaboration of artists Kim Christine Pababair, Marina Seriola, and Rene Avila with an excerpt of the national anthem Lupang Hinirang in Baybayin text in consultation with Dante Enage. So according to Gerson, Catriona was very strict when it comes to designing the designing and execution of the costume. She wants the costume to be as authentic as possible, as said by Gerson. That's why Catriona and her team made an immersion to the cultural communities in Leyte and Lake Cebu. Actually, this is from Gerson mismo dahil during the preparation for the quincentennial and nung time na na-acquire ng National Historical Commission of the Philippines, yung na-loan pala ng National Historical Commission of the Philippines yung costume sa mga owners si Catriona, bumibisita si Gerson sa office para bigyan kami ng background mismo kung paano niya dinesign and binuo yung costumes ni Catriona. So here are some of the teasers and IG postings of Gerson de Mavivas prior in revealing to the public the entire costume. So ito yung naging process na pag-design ni Gerson sa national costume ni Cat. So the historical context of the national costume. the historical and cultural context. So the National Historical of the Philippines appreciates the unique way the owners and designers inform the public the importance of the batik or the tattoo motifs in the Philippine history. So details of which are featured in the bodysuit designed by Demami Vaz. So which was inspired by the earliest known illustration of the tattooed hangaway or Visayan warriors in the 16th century Boxer Codex of the Lily Library at the Indiana University. So the Boxer Codex, also called as the Manila Manuscript, is a manuscript written and illustrated in 1590, which contains illustrations of various ethno-linguistic groups in the Philippines, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Micronesia at the time of their initial contacts with the European. So it was named after Charles R. Boxer, who in 1947 accidentally purchased the manuscript from Lord Ilchester Library at Holland House in London. So the Boxer Codex depicts the Tagalog, Visayas, Zambales, Cagayanes, and Negritos of the Philippines. So it's believed that the original owner of the manuscript was Luis Perez Dasmariñas, son of Governor General Gomez Perez Dasmariñas, who was killed in 1593 by the Sangleys or Chinese living in the Philippines. So Luis succeeded his father in office as Governor General of the Philippines. Since Spanish colonial governors were required to submit written reports on the territories they governed, it is likely that the manuscript was written under the orders of the governor. So the Visayan ancestors are described in the Boxer Codex as accustomed to paint their bodies with some very elegant tattoos. They do this with iron or brass rods, so the points of which are heated on fire. They have artisans who were adept to this. So they do this with such order, symmetry, and coordination that they elicit admiration from those who see them. So these are done in the manner of illuminations, painting all parts of the body such as chest, yung stomach, legs, arms, shoulders, yung mga kamay, mga muscles, and among some, yung posterior part sa likod. So the batik motifs serve as decoration for courageous warriors who emerged victorious in battles. So historian Dr. Vicente Villan indicated that the batik also serve as protection of the dungan. So this is an individual spirit that kept the kaladuwa or yung soul healthy and guarded it from evil elements. So this is in ancient Visayan society. So when Christianity became the dominant religion in the Visayas, the use of batik was discouraged, and its spiritual values was transmuted to sacred articles like the rosaries, scapular, anting-anting, while the armed forces transformed the batik into medals. So these are some of the illustrations of the Visayans in the Boxer Codex. So these are the Visayan warriors. So the Boxer Codex described the Visayans as used to tattoo their bodies with very elegant elements and symbols, and with such order, symmetry, and coordination that elicit admiration from those who see them. The most tattooed Visayans were usually warriors and leaders. So the Spaniards called them pintados or painted people. Another illustration is this one, the Visayan Society. So the Boxer Codex documented a folklore among the Visayas that a bird pegged or on a bamboo floating on the sea, splitting it two and coming forth the first man and woman created simultaneously and equally. They also had stratifications in society, the datu class or the noblemen, the timawa or commoners, and olipon or slaves. So another illustration from the Boxer Codex is the Visayan couple. So women wore multicolored striped dress made of cotton. They also wore taffeta and damask textile from China as a symbol of nobility. Women wore crowns made of jewels, crowns made of Chinese tinsel, or simply garlands made of roses and flowers from the garden. So lastly, another Visayan couple in gold. So a number of Visayans were gold artisans who do filigree work skillfully. So they adorn their bodies with gold accessories such as golden chains and cloth fastener, uh, even the Turkish-like turban for young men, locally called podong, had strips of gold. So these are excerpts from the translation of the Boxer Codex edited by Donoso in 2016 as published by Anvil. So the involvement of the Quincentennial commemoration to the national costume. So for the National Quincentennial Committee, the Maviva's design of Miss Grace's national costume would undoubtedly be educational, with the country gearing up in its preparation to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan. Antonio Pigafetta, the chronicler of the Magellan Elcano expedition, reached the Visayas in 1521, described the Visayans as tattooed people. So right after the Miss Universe 2018 National Costume Competition, last December 10, 2018, the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat wrote Miss Catriona Gray inviting her to attend the launching of the Quincentennial commemorations in the Philippines on December 21, 2018. So here's the letter of the signed by Dr. Rene Escalante, the chairman of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, to Miss Universe Catriona Gray, inviting her to the launching of the Quincentennial commemorations. So unfortunately, hindi syempre nakarating si Catriona dahil during this time is under na siya ng Miss Universe organization. So in the letter also, the NQC recognized the importance of the costume to the values to the importance of the costume to the values of the Quincentennial commemorations. So with the assistance of the Philippine Embassy in Bangkok, Thailand, and the Philippine Airlines, of course, the costume was transported back to the Philippines in time with the kickoff of the Quincentennial commemorations. So here's the letter of Ambassador Bernardo Arabon to Dr. Escalante, stating na na-inform na nila yung trainer ni Catriona regarding sa proposal na hiramin yung costume ni Catriona. So the bodysuit and the accessories arrived in the Philippines on December 20, 2018, while the lantern arrived at 2 o'clock a.m. of December 21, 2018. So the NHCP conservators immediately made necessary actions to assess the costumes and do the immediate interventions to safeguard and repair the costume in time for the launching, which is also on the same day. So the costume, particularly yung lantern, arrived in a very bad condition. So karamihan is busted yung lights, tanggal yung mga pukpok sa gilid. Siguro after the show, minadali itong i-repack. So for the bodysuit, there are some loose beads. So according to the designer, to Gerson, the costume is not meant for a long public exhibition. So hindi inaasahan ng team ni Catriona na i-display ito for public at ma-appreciate ng isang national cultural agency. So akala lang nila it's only for one-day use, pang isang araw lang talaga. And they were very surprised na nalaman nila na i-display dito sa NHCP. So the costume was first exhibited during the launching of the 2021 Quincentennial commemorations in the Philippines last December 21, 2018 at the National Historical Commission of the Philippines 4th floor function hall. So later, it was transferred to the lobby, to the NHCP lobby for public viewing in time for the 2018 Rizal Day commemoration. So it was again open to the public for the first leg of the Quincentennial Lecture Series entitled Tattooing in the Life of Our Ancestor with Professor Xiao Chu as the speaker. So here are some of the photos during the launching. So ito yung unveiling ng logo ng Quincentennial, the iconic 500 logo. And then ito yung costume na naka-display siya sa function hall. So here is Dr. Escalante with Professor Xiao Chu and yung trainer ni Catriona na si Architect Buendia. So ayan. So from the NHCP, after yung first Quincentennial Lecture Series, it was transferred to the Bella Vista Hotel in Lapu-Lapu City in line with the second Quincentennial Lecture Series and the 2021 QCP Stakeholders Meeting Visayas Leg. So the lecture was delivered in Cebuano by Dr. Jose Eliezer Versales, entitled The World of Lapu-Lapu. So the third exhibit for the costume was in the Oriental Hotel in Leyte in time for the Leyte Landing commemoration. So Dr. Rolando Morinaga served as the speaker for the third leg of the Quincentennial Lecture Series. So, ayan. Here are some of the photos kung paano siya in-exhibit. This one is in the Oriental Hotel. And then, another one is display ito sa University of the Assumption sa San Fernando City, Pampanga in line with the National Conference on Lantern Studies. So materials assessment by the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. So based on the assessment of the Materials Research Conservation Division of the NHCP, the national costume is made of two general pieces, the bodysuit and the lantern backdrop. So the bodysuit consists of sheer stretch bodysuit embellished with blue and red Swarovski crystals, Swarovski beads adhered to with glue. So the pintadas pattern was sublimation printed on the sheer stretched material and traced with faceted beads. So the suit has a zipper on the back and on the calves. So a silk satin stylized loincloth is worn under the traditional brass Tivoli belt, Helet Tahu. So 19 brass bangles on varying sizes and shapes were worn on each wrist. And so according to Demavibas, during their immersion sa community sa Lake Cebu, talagang may meanings yung mga sinusuot na brass bangles on each wrist. So according to Demavibas, kung ano yung nasa magkabila dapat is parehas lang din. So meron din yung bilang. So the 5-inch platform, so this is a photo of the body suit na material characterization at sinusukat ng MRCD. So here's a closer photo of the Swarovski beads na naka-tattoo pattern. So the 5-inch platform shoes in the gladiator style were worn with the costume. The thigh-high shoes are decorated with traditional patterns and textiles and secured using buckles at the back. So the headdress used is also a traditional Tivoli, two pieces joined together, composed of a hand-carved wooden comb with mirrors and a cascading bead decoration worn on top of a hair bun. So ito yung photograph ng ng headdress ni Catriona, ng Tivoli-inspired headdress na approximately almost 1.5 kilos yung bigat. So the movable lantern backdrop is two-faced. So the front features the backlighted parol design made of the thin fiber resin inspired by the Christmas lanterns of Pampanga. The thin fiber resin is attached to a circular metal armature. So the back side features a canvas painting in vignettes of Philippine history bordered by a baybayin of the national anthem. So the painting is attached with Velcro on the armature. So the edges of the pattern of the lantern is bordered by a traditional pukpok featuring scrolls and arabesque. So the lantern, yung parol, weighs approximately 50 kilograms according to MRCD, including the elaborate lighting mechanism. So the beaded bodysuit, yung tattoo, yung boxer inspired bodysuit weighs 1 kilogram. So the brass belt, 3 kilograms. The headdress is 1.5 kilograms. And the boots totals 4 kilos. So a total weight of 10 kilos including the accessories. So overall, the entire ensemble is more or less nasa 60 kilograms including yung yung parol sa likod. So the Tivoli elements utilize traditional materials and techniques, while the lantern is completely modern both in materials and construction, having used fiberglass sheets instead of paper for durability. So the painting at the back of the lantern utilized oil paints on heavy canvas attached via Velcro straps. So the brass pokpok design also used the traditional technique. The boots were made with dyed leatherette and embroidered strips. So upon transporting, the components of the bodysuits and accessories were shipped and packed individually inside its original suitcase, while the lantern was packed in a special crate made of galvanized iron to minimize damage handling. So to conclude, the national costume of Miss Universe 2018 Catriona Gray embodies one of the themes of the National Quincentennial Committee wants to promote, the rich culture of the early Filipinos. So this is aside from commemorating the victory at Mactan, the Philippine part in the first circumnavigation of the world, and the introduction of Christianity. So the NQC also aims to promote the rich pre-colonial history of our country. The NQC wants to reset the mindset of the Filipinos by highlighting our early history and depart from the textbook knowledge that we were discovered by Magellan, by visualizing our ancestors through the national costume of Miss Universe 2018, Catriona Gray. So before I end this presentation, I invite everyone to watch the 7-minute promotional video by the National Quincentennial Committee regarding the importance of the national costume of Miss Universe 2018 Catriona Gray to the Quincentennial commemorations.
disenyo ng damit sa depiksyon ng mga mandirigmang Bisaya na matatagpuan sa Boxer Codex noong 1590. Ang mga batik o tattoo ay tulad ng mga anting-anting na proteksyon ng kaluluwa ng mandirigma mula sa kasamaan at kumakatawan din sa kagitingan, tagumpay at kapangyarihan ng ating mga bagani. At para naman sa Mindanao, ang kalinangan ng mga lumad na tiboli na ipinahayag ng kanilang mga habing tinalak na ang mga disenyo ay binubuo nila mula sa kanilang mga panaginip. Ang disenyong batik at mga abubot na tiboli ay dinisenyo rin ni Dema Vivas, habang ang bota naman na nagtataglay ng mga habing Mindanaoan ay dinisenyo ni Jojo Bragay sa tulong ni Ardel Presentacion. Sa likuran ng kanyang kasuotan ay isang obra ng pinagsaluhang kasaysayan at kalinangan ng mga katutubo, Muslim at Kristiyano sa tradisyon ng mga obra ni Botong Francisco at nagtataglay ng mga imahe ng Pahiyas, Nuestro Padre Jesus Nazareno, Sampaguita, Kulintang, Bayanihan, Moriones, mga eksena sa dinagyang, trahedya at katapangan sa Marawi, Wali-wali, Butanding, Jeepney, Pandango sa Ilaw, Singkil, Tinalak, Sinulog, Haribon, Gigantes, Maskara, South Sea Pearls, Bulkang Mayon at Bulkang Taal, ilog sa ilalim ng lupa, mga nakaligtas sa Yolanda, Kalabaw, Payo sa Banawe, Chocolate Hills, Masjid di Maukom o mas kilala bilang Pink Mosque, Bulol at Manunggul Jar. Gayon din, ang 500 taon ng kagitingan at tagumpay mula sa labanan sa Mactan ni Lapu-Lapu hanggang sa partisipasyon ng kababaihan sa pagtindig para sa kalayaan tulad ni Gabriela Silang at Tandang Sora, ang pagbubuo ng nasyon sa pamamagitan ng mga sinulat at eroismo ni Jose Rizal at ng himagsikang Pilipino na sinimulan ng katipunan at nagbunsod ng ating proklamasyon ng kalayaan mula sa 300 taong kolonyalismo sa Kawit Cavite at ang pagwawagayway ng ating pambansang bandila. Nakapaligid sa obra ay ang disenyong barok ng mga simbahang ipinagmamalaki bilang UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Gawang disenyo sa pukpok o brass metal craft ni Tomas Ramirez ng Pampanga. Nakapaligid din ng ilang kataga mula sa ating pambansang awit sa baybayin, lupang hinira, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisihin, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy, at sa langit mong buhaw. Si Justin Aliman ang siyang pangkalahatang nag-ayos sa estilo ng pambansang kasuotan na ipinambato ni Catriona. Sa pagpapakita ng labanan sa Mactan at sa itsura ng ating mga ninuno bago dumating ang mga Espanyol, lalo na ang mga batik ng mga pintados ayon sa Boxer Codex, maging ang pagpapakita ng ilang elementong Kristiyano, ay sinalamin na ng kasuotan na ito ni Catriona ang diwa ng paggunita sa kinsentenaryo o 500 taon ng kagitingan at tagumpay sa Mactan, ang pagpapakilala ng Kristyanismo sa Pilipinas, at ang unang pag-ikot ng tao sa mundo sa 2021. Kaya naman, ang National Quincentennial Committee ay sumulat agad kay Catriona isang araw matapos niyang isuot ang kasuotan upang ipakita ito sa mga Pilipino. Sa tulong ng Pambansang Komisyong Pangkasaysayan ng Pilipinas, Embahada ng Pilipinas sa Thailand at ng Philippine Airlines, dali-daling naiuwi ang mahalagang cargo upang maitanghal sa pagpapasinaya ng paggunitang pang-quincentenaryo noong ika-21 ng Disyembre 2018. Binalikan ni Catriona ang kultura at kasaysayan sapagkat nais niyang sa paglakad niya sa entablado sa harap ng daigdig, hindi lamang niya suot ang pangalan ng Pilipinas, ngunit dala niya ang bigat ng mga tagumpay, trahedya at higit sa lahat, ang kadakilaan ng sambayanang Pilipino. Kaya naman, sa tagumpay ni Catriona na makoronahan ng Miss Universe 2018, pinakita rin natin sa kanya ang ating pagkakaisa at pagmamahal. Mensahe ni Catriona sa bawat sasaksi sa kasuotan niya ito, ang pamanay pagyamanin, ang bayan ay mahalin. Ito ang Pilipinas.
Mr. Cruz. I think all of our viewers now have a greater appreciation of the national costume worn by Miss Catriona Gray. And I also hope that the people will have another opportunity to visit NHCP and see the costume and see all the details that you discuss in your lecture. At this opportunity, I would also like to thank all of our other speakers for their enlightening presentations. We will now open the floor to questions and comments from our audience. So our Zoom attendees may continue using the chat or the Q&A function to send their questions, while our audience on Facebook may post their questions in the comments section, and the technical team will collate and forward them to our speakers. May we now call back all of our speakers to see if they're ready to answer the questions? Are all of the speakers here already? Let me see. Yes, I think yes. All right. Okay, so let's dive into our questions. So the very first question here in our Q&A section comes from Mr. Harold Buenvenida. He said, I think this is addressed to Dr. Borinaga. Mr. Buenvenida asks, I would like to ask the speaker about the Homonhon-Limasawa connection and the first Mass. In some books, there are confusions about where the first Mass was held. A priest from Butuan contends that it was in Masawa. Can you elucidate? Many thanks and swell admiration to you. Dr. Borinaga?
Thank you, Sir Harold, for the question. So about the Homonhon and Limasawa link, and you mentioned the first Mass. So there's this issue about the where the first Mass was held, and I guess many of you are familiar with it already. But the main controversy was between Mas Limasawa and Butuan. But more recently, there's also been new arguments that the first Mass might have been first held in Homonhon. So that's and there's even a recent book that's come out. So I guess that's the link between these three. So the one between Limasawa and Butuan was about the exact location, given how in the coordinates given by Pigafetta, kay 9 2/3 degrees, so it is in the middle of the sea. So there's some inaccuracy, I guess, in the measurement, and as Sir Alec had mentioned, the reason for that. So the instruments that they had were not yet as accurate as they would become. But the one in Homonhon, so the problem with that is that there is no mention of a Mass prior to the one held in Masawa. So that's the other. It was called Masawa in Pigafetta's account, and but in subsequent years, there's Limasawa that's been accepted by the NHCP and the previous panels as the right side of the first Easter Sunday Mass. But there's a contention that it might have been elsewhere. There's a Masaw in Butuan, and there's a hypothesis that there might have been some other island that is no longer extant today. So I guess that's the only comments I can provide so far.
Thank you very much, Dr. Borinaga. Our next question, I think, is addressed to the three members of the team from NQC, Ms. Nerves, Mr. Heradilla, and the attorney architect Villegas. The question is from an anonymous attendee, and he or she asks, why is it that the exact locations of the route of the Magellan-Elcano expedition are not being added in Philippine history textbooks? How can we add these locations to our curriculum? Any of you may answer? That's wonderful, Mr. Redadila. I hope that that really pushes through and that there will be a fruitful endeavors after that. Our next question is addressed to Professor Doblado. Professor Doblado, there's a question here. How did the residents of Palawan appreciate or react to the fact that Palawan was actually part of the itinerary of the Magellan Elcano expedition? Sir, you're on mute, sir. We cannot hear your professor. We cannot hear you.
I apologize. The Palaweños were actually surprised. So when I submitted the position paper to the NHCP and it was validated by the committee, then we had announcements on radio on the sites. So the four municipalities, especially, we talked to the mayors. They were also surprised. If you read in previous books of history, if they mention Palawan, it's actually just in passing. It's not focusing on a specific area. So I think the challenge there for the previous researchers are they're not really versed with the geography or the place. So very important talaga yung paggamit ng toponymy, no? Toponymy and yung local knowledge of the names of old names of the places. So they were surprised, and gaya ng kanina na reaction, even the local DepEd are asking for a module. So they want it to be integrated in teaching, especially sa grade, I think grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5, they have Philippine history. It can be used in the context of localization and contextualization in teaching Philippine history by using local materials, local experiences. And like what I've said, everybody agrees na it changes yung pre-Hispanic history of Palawan. Kasi yung focus lang lagi is Northern Palawan because of the old churches there, Cuyo, Taytay, Coron, and wala sa history yung mga Kastila sa Southern Palawan. So it actually changed yung narratives namin dito. And everybody was excited. So it's actually showing yung dynamism ng pagsusulat ng kasaysayan.
Thank you, Professor. Actually, no, very interesting idea na actually sa akin I consider myself a history enthusiast. No, yung idea of a cosmopolitan society in Palawan during that time was something na parang kailangan natin acknowledge na may ganong palang level of of society sa Philippines during that time. Thank you very much, Professor Doblado. The next question is addressed to Architect Villegas. This is a very technical set of questions, Architect. Number one, it's from an anonymous attendee. Did I hear it right that the reliefs are made of cast iron? Was this also painted over or was gloss just painted on it? Siguro yun muna yung una nating set of questions. Kasi susunod na yung iba.
Okay, thank you for that question. Actually, I mentioned that the bas-reliefs or the sculptural reliefs are made of banded marble. So it was the historical markers that are made of cast iron. So they're all painted and also may gloss din siya on top. So that's the answer for that.
Okay po. Itong next question related kahit paano dun sa earlier question. What responsibility is demanded from the locality where the marker is placed? May we know the reason of those localities who preferred not to claim their markers?
The main responsibility of the local government units is actually maintaining the historical markers or the markers and the sites. But also, part of their responsibility is to pass on the knowledge about it, because some of the markers needs more information than just what is written on the historical markers. Like in the case of Maguindanao, the Maguindanao marker is actually placed in Cotabato City. So the tourism or the local tourism office have the responsibility to explain these parts to the locals, to the tourists. So we also ask them to include it in their tourism plan. So that's their responsibility. And have I answered all the questions?
Yes, naman.
Okay.
Na-answer naman Architect Villegas. No, sorry, may remaining question. Why were the other local governments did not attempt to get their markers?
Oh, actually, I haven't mentioned any of that, but actually there is one marker na wasn't claimed by the local government units for the reason that they don't believe that the history claimed by our end, the researches that we've done, actually is aligned to their local history. So with that, we respect their viewpoint on that. So that's it.
That's very interesting. No, may ganun pa palang perspective, no, na may clash or conflict between their local history as they understand it, no, and as presented by researchers, no. Very interesting. I hope that gets to be discussed, no, para mas thresh out natin yung differences na yan. Our next question is for Mr. Jerwil Cruz. For Jerwil, mukhang maraming interested dito sa national costume ni Ms. Catriona Gray, no? An anonymous attendee is asking, is it the right time for the national government, specifically the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, to initiate and assist our delegates as in beauty pageant as they are ambassadresses of goodwill, sharing the multicultural state of the Philippines?
Actually, Sir JP and sa nagtanong niyan, I think it's better left to the organization that handles the brand to which our beauty queens are competing. So I think the national costume, the designing of the national costume should be left to the creative minds of the designers. So I know na aware naman sila sa cultural nuances dito sa Pilipinas and nagre-research naman sila. Just like yung costume ni Catriona, which is very authentic dahil nag-immerse talaga sina Gerson doon sa mga communities kung saan nila kinuha yung mga design ng costume.
I see. Okay, so pero kung may lalapit naman na designer sa NHCP for help, naman, no, open naman kayo for insisting them.
Yes, actually we are welcoming everyone to our office, especially kung nagre-research sila, dahil we can actually guide them on the proper information na gusto nila i-imply doon sa mga costumes na dinedesign nila.
Nako, uulanin ka ng request, Mr. Cruz. Dahil dyan. Alright, our next question is for Dr. Borinaga. Medyo contentious to, Dr. Borinaga, pero I believe you're very, very intelligent enough to answer this one. If Filipinos by blood were charitable, humanistic, and among other inherent values enshrined, why is it during the time of unfortunate event in summer related during the typhoon, I think this is the Haiyan or the Yolanda typhoon, there is a semblance of individualistic and different image or color of politics simply because it is a baluarte of contrapartido, which appeals to one's provincialism? That's the first question, sir. The second question is, what can you say on the juxtaposition or paradoxes of Filipino culture as a Visayan historian? It is also part of the fortunate and misfortunate narrative of the land of Diwata or the land of the dead. So that's the question. Those are the questions, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the question. Thank you. When it comes to Haiyan, so I guess you're referring to the color coding that transpired, so how the relief goods were distributed along party lines or among allies. So indeed, that's true. Pero there's also a continuity to pre-colonial times. So when you say provincialism, so that had indeed been the case even before. So in the presentation, I mentioned how there was slave sacrifice, there was raiding. So this was done to the target communities were outside one's own clan or one's own confederation. So there were lists of confederations there, the Arayas, the Ilagines, there were others that might not have been named. But it's apparent in the markings of the PINQC. So there were indeed alliances between Masawa and Butuan and Baybay and some of the nearby islands. And even within Leyte, there were also divisions between perhaps Baybay and Masawa. So that's been there since before. Only that with Christianization, Hispanization, so the clans had been transformed. So the loyalties perhaps became smaller, or it became directed towards the missionaries. So we can't discount ang so-called provincialism that has been there since before. Pero in the case of Yolanda, I guess the main difference was that it was now based on perhaps political dynasties or the alliance between the barangay captain and the mayor, or the recipient of the recipient household, and whether they were supportive of the barangay captain. But there was also sharing. So even in the distribution of looted goods, of yung mga provisions, so it was shared across community lines or family lines. So you can't also discount that continuity with pre-colonial times, and perhaps that value that when there's these catastrophes, these are the great equalizers. Ito yung makakapatag, and as mentioned, ang meaning that the Visayans attributed to Makapatag was the equality of divine justice. So there was a notion nga these are part of our life. Okay? We are in a hazard-prone environment, and what can you do when these things happen? So all you can do is to share. Okay? But there's no more rich, there's no more poor. The society has been flattened, and how do you survive? So you help each other. So I guess that's also a carryover from those pre-colonial times. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, which also explains din kung bakit nag-shift Dr. Borinaga, no, yung nilalagay nating significance sa mga places and events na ito, no?
Yes.
Okay.
Saka yung mga extreme events din.
That's right, that's right. Thank you very much. Our next question is for Professor Doblado. Professor, this is from anonymous attendee. Are there any documents or what basically happened to Palawan in between the time of the Magellan Elcano expedition and the arrival of the colonizers during the time of Legazpi? What happened during the interim period?
Interim period, basically, it continued kasi Palawan was originally part of the Sultanate of Borneo, and then it was transferred to the Sultanate of Sulu. So you have actually two areas, yung areas that were colonized, Christianized by the Spaniards coming from the Visayas. Actually, northern Palawan, heavily Christianized siya. You have Cuyo, you have Taytay, and they were being governed, administered through, I think, Iloilo or Antique. And then the rest, so you have El Nido, and then you have Rojas, pababa ng Puerto Princesa, down to Balabac. It's part of the Sultanate. So basically, the Moros were collecting paramitan or taxes from the local inhabitants at that time. And nagkaroon ng mga what you call Moro raids, lalo na sa northern Palawan, because it was dati kasi they collected also from these communities. So nahati nga, you have yung Paragua at saka Paragua Sur. Yung Paragua, that's northern Palawan, and then you have Paragua Sur, which is southern Palawan, inhabited by the unchristianized, and then by the Moros, no, under the control of the Moros. Nagkaroon lang na expansion sa southern Palawan with, or effective control sa southern Palawan with the establishment of Puerto Princesa during 1872. So that's what happened in the interim. So parang nga siyang, it's like a blank slate kasi it's part of what we call the Sultanate of Sulu.
Wow, that's very interesting. No? Parang maganda siyang gawing topic ng isang extensive webinar din, ano, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor Doblado. Our next question is for the group of Alec, Juvelin, and Architect Villegas. Would the markers be covered by multi-year budget allocation to maintain them? Michelangelo Yoder said that he has been to Baler in 2016 and some markers of NHCP were not maintained, including the one in the mini plaza.
I'll answer that for the team. So the NHCP, once the marker is transferred or turned over to the local government units or the stakeholders, it is the responsibility of the end user to actually maintain it. So we don't cover the maintenance after that. So actually there are over 1,000 markers in the Philippines, so we couldn't cover all of that. And even in restoring, even in our restoration projects, once we restore structure, it's the responsibility of the end users to maintain it and take care of it.
I see. Architect, ito may follow-up question. Any update daw po on the quincentennial marker in Kabalian, Southern Leyte, known as Abaryan? Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that, Alec. I think we have two more questions left. This one is from Michelangelo Yoder, and anyone from NQC, NHCP can answer this. Is it correct that the local research council or entity can decline to accept the research that the NHCP conducted, even if based on evidence and scholars vetted the said NHCP research or information? Indeed, you're right, Alec. No, kasi they really are stakeholders of that marker in that essence, diba? So their views on that matter should also be considered. Thank you. Ato, yung last question, i-combine ko na, and light na lang yung question na to. Number one, first part ng question ay, available po ba sa portal ng NQC ang lahat ng webinars ng PIQC, and available po ba ang souvenir items like polo shirts, umbrellas and calendars, at kung meron man, saan daw po sila pwedeng makakuha?
Hello po. With regards to the souvenirs of the National Quincentennial Committee, actually, they are produced for a limited time, especially during the 2021 Quincentennial Commemoration of the Philippines. Though these are free, they are limited. So we cannot give everybody the polo shirts, the memorial markers. Unfortunately, guys, we cannot give you these souvenirs. Ayun. With regards to the online lectures of the National Quincentennial Committee, and even the this PIQC, everybody can have access to our lectures. Just visit the NQC official website. You may also view the Facebook page of NQC. Actually, all our lectures are being recorded. So just visit our website and our Facebook pages. So actually, guys, the NQC website, as I mentioned a while ago, is full of learning materials. Not only documentaries, not only lectures. There are interactive map about the Philippine route of the Magellan-Elcano expedition in the Philippines 500 years ago. There are animated images of our pre-colonial ancestors, and many more. So just visit our website.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nieves. Thank you. So this has been a really fruitful afternoon, and we surely learned a lot from our panel of experts. From the article of Mr. Robert Kuti, we learned the importance of verifying sources and of the correct use of data and analysis to avoid creation of quote-unquote myths and the propagation of misinformation. We have to be conscious of this because from the mouth of a respected authority, even unverified information is accepted without question as fact. Meanwhile, Dr. George Emmanuel Borinaga's lecture illuminates for us the early Visayans' view of Homonhon Island as a sacred land and how its significance for the early Visayans shifted or developed over time. Dr. Borinaga also showed us how the early Visayans' belief systems allowed them to view the members of the Magellan-Elcano expedition as returning relatives. But this view also shifted over time as they fought to regain their control or their pre-colonial culture, but eventually settled to an accommodation or acceptance of this newer culture as part of their survival and adaptation. On the other hand, Professor Michael Angelo Doblado's discussion on the contacts and encounters of the East and the West in Palawan in 1521 shows us that some of the people living in Palawan during that time were cosmopolitan, with ties to the various trade centers in the region. The members of the Magellan-Elcano expedition witnessed the bravery, nobility, generosity, and most especially the kindness and the friendship offered by the people living in Palawan during that time. And from the team of architect Janisa Villegas, Ms. Juvelin Nieves, and Mr. Joseph Alec Heradilla, they highlighted the efforts of the NQC in making information related to the quincentennial commemorations, making them more accessible to the people not just in the Philippines but around the world. In doing so, many people have become and continue to become aware of the significant role of the Philippines in the first circumnavigation of the world. Through the marking of 34 historic sites, we know more now about what happened to the members of that expedition after the Battle of Mactan and how our ancestors interacted with them. And last but not certainly the least, Mr. Jerwil Cruz enlightened us on the pre-colonial influences that were integrated in the national costume of 2018 Miss Universe, Miss Catriona Gray. Those who helped design and create the national costume relied not only on their imagination, but on a strong foundation of research and interpretation. So at this point, we would like to present certificates of appreciation to our speakers. Kindly allow me to read the text of the certificates. So these certificates of appreciation are awarded to the following: Robert Cuti, George Emmanuel Borinaga, PhD, Michael Angelo Doblado, Juvelin Yerves, Joseph Alec Heredila, Architect Jenisa Villegas, and Jerwil Cruz for their presentations in the Philippine International Quincentennial Conference Session 9, entitled Year of Filipino Pre-Colonial Ancestors Special Papers, on December 15, via Zoom webinar. This session is co-convened with the National Museum of the Philippines and the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. The National Quincentennial Committee was created through Executive Order Number 55, Series of 2018, to prepare the country in commemorating the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan, the Philippine part in the first circumnavigation of the world, and other related events. The Philippine International Quincentennial Conference is also in solidarity with the year of Filipino pre-colonial ancestors and the Philippine-Spanish Friendship Day. Given this 15th day of December 2021, signed by Dr. Rene R. Escalante, Executive Director, National Quincentennial Committee, Chairman, National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and Chief Convener, Philippine International Quincentennial Conference. So thank you very much once again to our esteemed speakers. Let's give them a virtual round of applause. Thank you very much. With that, we end the session 9 of the Philippine International Quincentennial Conference. It is now 4:44 p.m. Philippine Standard Time. We invite everyone to catch the last session of the PIQC tomorrow, December 16, 2021 at 1 p.m., entitled Manifesting and Attesting, or rather Asserting, a Filipino Point of View. It will be convened by the University of the Philippines Department of History. We also would like to invite everyone to join us for the closing program of the PIQC on December 17 at 4 p.m. You can catch the live stream on the Facebook pages flashed on your screen, or join us here in the Zoom at a first-come, first-served basis by registering at www.nqc.gov.ph/PIQC. This has been your moderator, John Paul Egalin Abellera from Project Saysay. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.